right, good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all distinguished guests and participants from all over the globe. My name is Jocelyn Jayasuriya representing UN 2020 and welcome to UN 2020's Global Town Hall, Civil Society at UN 75, developing a plan of action for the future in observance of Human Rights Day, which is tomorrow. Welcome everyone. You know, the purpose of this gathering is twofold. Firstly, to acknowledge and build on the potential for civil society's engagement with the UN and its member states in light of UN 75 and the current circumstances. And the second is to galvanize multi-stakeholder engagement towards systematic action to follow through on the commitments and proposals made in both the UN 75 political declaration adopted by heads of state last September, as well as in the UN 75 People's Declaration, the UN We Need, endorsed by over 1,500 members of civil society since its release last May at the UN 75 People's Assembly, something that UN 2020 is extremely proud of. Today's program will begin with an opening reflection by Ambassador Jan Eliasson, Chair of the Governing Board, Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, followed by two very interactive discussions of 1 hour each between leading experts and members of the audience on the themes setting the stage, the current context and the role of civil society, and secondly, the path ahead, the potential and opportunities for civil society social engagement. These two sessions will be punctuated by a musical interlude featuring two amazing youth from the Middle East and Africa. So that hopefully will keep us all awake. So stay tuned. Using the fishbowl strategy for this dynamic interaction, we aim to engage as many participants as possible in this dialogue. So we want all of you to be involved, asking the questions that you desire. So a few technical instructions for this. In order to participate fully, please use the raise your hand function to ask any questions or enter your questions in the Q&A, and our technical experts will help you with that. We also have an amazing final session facilitated by none other than Dan Perel. We will be using a manner of interactive tools to help us develop a path forward by identifying elements of an action plan through the Zoom polls, Mentimeter, and others. So he has kindly requested for everyone to input in two manners. Firstly, in the chat box, you will find a link to a keywords and concept document. This is where we would ask you to put words and concepts onto that document that you hear during the course of this proceeding that you find significant or resonant to you. The purpose of this exercise is so that we can create an amazing word cloud that will be shared at the final session. Secondly, please share in this same document ideas, events, advocacy points, campaigns that could be useful to consider in light of the need to strengthen global cooperation. So we thank you very much for that. Without further ado, introducing a man that actually really does not need any introduction, the living legend himself, Ambassador Jan Eliasson, Chair of the Governing Board, Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, to give his opening reflections. Ambassador.
Thank you very much, Jocelyn. I hope you hear me. Good. I'm very glad to be invited to this global town hall in recognition of UN 75 and its political declaration, not least, where the Swedish and Qatari ambassadors played a very important role in the creation of this very important document. And it's also a particular pleasure to speak on the eve of Human Rights Day tomorrow, which we should keep in mind. And thirdly, of course, to honor and, in my view, emphasize the role of civil society for peace, development, and human rights, and the work of the United Nations in these three sectors, which are so strongly interdependent. I think the main message that I have for the road ahead is to, more than ever, put the human being in the center. You know from my time at the UN that I always carried the UN Charter with me and reminded the audience that the first three words of the UN Charter was "we the peoples." It's not "we the governments," it's "we the peoples." And we need to keep the fate and the situation for the individual very much in the center if we are to be true to the UN Charter. You may also know that I was very much active in the area of human rights. I was particularly active on a program which was called Human Rights Up Front. And before that, I had worked hard as president of the UN General Assembly to bring in the responsibility to protect in the document 2005 that was adopted, and I think which we need to be reminded of all the time. But I thought I would show you something that is of a personal importance to me, namely this brochure. I got it from a woman in Sweden who had been in New York 1950, 2 years after the adoption of the Universal Declaration. And she had been attending a seminar with a wonderful lady leading the meeting. And she came up to the lady afterwards and asked for her autograph, and she wrote the autograph. She kept this brochure in Sweden in her library until end of 90s, when I was talking on human rights on Swedish television. And then she sent it to me, and I thought, very nice, a brochure from 1950, 25 cents, it says here. But I looked then at the second page, and what does it say? With good wishes, Eleanor Roosevelt. I think this is a particularly important reminder to me of human rights. Again, this rule that I think we should live by, to put the human being in the center. Because in today's world, the most vulnerable and the most oppressed and the poorest are in fact the ones who pay the highest price. You see it in how COVID-19 hits different categories and people, both inside the rich countries and the poor countries. You see that the most vulnerable and the poorest are the ones paying the highest price, not to speak about the poorest countries vis-a-vis the rich countries. You see it also in the area of climate change. When you look at, for instance, the Sahel area, you have a combination of poverty, migration pressures, terrorism, and drought of a character that must be related to climate change. And we will have to expect huge numbers of people, millions and millions of people, who will be refugees or migrants from the climate change situations in their countries. But it is the poorest, again, who pay that price. And in conflicts, which I've dealt with so much, I've seen the same thing, how women and children pay the price, how the innocent people are hit by landmines, how schools are bombed, how even hospitals are bombed. And reminding me of the huge disrespect of both human rights and international humanitarian law. We need really a revival of both human rights knowledge and knowledge of the international humanitarian law. I think we come back then to how we move ahead to strengthen the hand and strengthen the voices of the poorest. And I think we come back to the United Nations. For me, the United Nations and a system of international law, of international cooperation and international solidarity is in fact the first line of defense. The first line of defense for the international community, but also for our nations. I think we need to see it in that context, that it is a matter of security to safeguard peace, development, respect for nature, and of course for human rights. And therefore, I think it is important that we now take part in a renaissance revival of international cooperation, of multilateralism. It looked very somber for a while, the last 4 years, not least because of the signals and actions taken by the US administration. But as we know, we will see soon another administration coming in with a completely different agenda when it comes to multilateral cooperation. We have been promised that the 21st of January, the day after the inauguration, US will return to the Paris Climate Agreement. And I hope that we will see similarly the return of the US to WHO, to UNESCO, to the Human Rights Council, to the Migration Compact, all the documents and agreements which unfortunately the United States abandoned during the last 4 years. And I think this is a very important sign. That in combination with the good news that it looks like we will have a vaccine available for the world, and I hope it will be fairly distributed to all within the next year. And then we will get out of this COVID pressure in so many respects, both personally and professionally for us. I hope that we will also conclude on international cooperation that, in fact, a good international agreement, let's take the Paris Agreement on climate change, is in fact in the national interest. I think we need to take away the artificial line between national and international, because practically every problem today are both national and international. Just look at migration, look at climate, look at all the global challenges. They are both national and international. And therefore, we need to realize that working through not least the United Nations, primarily through the United Nations, and creating strong agreements in different areas is in fact in the national interest of member states. It's not something in the sky with blue UN idealism and so forth. It's really down to earth security. And I would even go as far to say that the most important word in today's world is not alone. Definitely not alone. It's together. Any problem you have, both at home and abroad today, need to have mobilization of actors from all society. We need the governments, of course, we need the international organizations, we need parliaments, but we also need civil society, and all of you who are working hard and toiling in the gardens of civil society. Thanks for what you're doing. We need the private sector, not least to carry out the Sustainable Development Goals. We need the innovation and technology and science in all areas, from health to transport to energy to how we build our cities and so forth. As you know, the goals of the Sustainable Agenda, the 17 ones. I was part of that negotiation. It was quite an ordeal and quite a labor, but wonderful results. So I would say that if we could sort of see the challenge after COVID, and I think we should start thinking about post-COVID. What kind of world do we want after COVID-19? I wish we could build a bridge between the resources that we put into fighting the pandemics, not only medically, but also financially. If you look at these huge packages and programs, we should move over that energy and those resources to fighting climate change. That's the existential threat. All the other problems become secondary if we don't deal with this primary threat to humanity and to the planet. And I would hope that we would sort of try to work out an agenda post-COVID-19. The second part of that agenda, to me, after COVID-19, is to try to do something about the very dangerous polarization that has taken place in the world in the last few years. Not only polarization between countries, we see very, very poor relations between the great powers today, but also polarization inside countries. People are facing each other with enmity and hatred and hate speech. And I think we need to come back to a language of cooperation, a language of diplomacy, a language of dialogue, and try to solve problems together. Because if we continue to be divided and split in the way we have seen in many countries, you've seen it recently in the United States, you still see it there, but also in Europe and elsewhere. That polarization I find very dangerous. It actually has to do, for me, with the health of democracies and the need to go back to reasoning and talking and having dialogue and finding solutions in a peaceful manner. Chapter 6 of the UN Charter for the experts, Pacific settlement of disputes, but that goes for both nations and people. So all this to tell you how much I appreciate this invitation. I thank you for your work. I thank you for your attention. I thank you for your honoring the UN 75 and honoring Human Rights Day, and also proving, I'm sure, the role of civil society. You are indispensable in the road ahead in the post-COVID period, and your voices should be heard loudly. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador, for your invaluable reflections and wisdom. You know, we hear that it's not just an auspicious day tomorrow, but recently you have also celebrated an auspicious day yourself. Happy 80th birthday to you. And so just a few questions to, I guess, pick your brain and to get some wisdom from you from one generation to the next. Based on your experience as a diplomat, and you mentioned today people being at the center, and now as a leading / honoring member of civil society, what recommendations could you offer to ensure that the diverse voices of civil society are included in the UN decision-making of all levels, particularly as space for civil society continues to be threatened at national and international levels?
First on age, thank you very much, although I didn't want you to mention the figure. Of course, that was mentioned.
Oh, geez.
I will give you a line that I like very much. Age is a matter of mind. And if you don't mind, it doesn't matter. That's where I am on age. On the role of society and about how this can be done, I think if we look into any problem that we have today, whether it is climate change, migration, or whatever, we should start by asking ourselves, who can influence the solution to the problems? Who can contribute to a solution of the problem? And we will then find that we will not only have around that table governments and international organizations, we will have civil society, we will have the private sector, we will have the university world, the academic world. Nobody can do everything, but everybody can do something. And when we then have gathered those people around the table, then we have a discussion of who does what. And in the end, we will reach a sort of informal or even sometimes formal distribution of labor. So if you apply that method, which I call the horizontal method, in contrast to the vertical method, the silo method, we all are in our silos, the lawyers, the economists, whatever, but we cannot solve the problems in our own silo. We can contribute to the problem, but in order to find the solutions, we need to go horizontal. And by that, by the way, I don't mean go to sleep, but rather mobilize the energy from all. And if you apply that method, you must then have the actors of civil society in on every discussion on these issues: climate, migration, poverty, peace building, human rights, of course, international humanitarian action and law. So all over the field, voices need to be heard. I felt when I was negotiating the SDGs, when the member states came with these ambitious 17 goals, I said, my God, you are really raising the level of ambition here. And then I said to myself, but realize you cannot do this alone. You got to mobilize then other actors, not least the financial world, by the way, the Bretton Woods system and the banks and the pension funds and so on. So yes, everybody has a role, and we got to realize that they should be brought around the table in different ways. And if that is being realized by member states and the Secretariat and others in the UN, you will be there and should be there. And I will let my voice be heard as long as I can be heard. Now they want to hear me.
That's amazing. It's so true that everyone does play a part, and we're truly better together. My next question is, during the 60th anniversary of the UN, you became the PGA after the 2005 Reform Summit that resulted in the Peacebuilding Commission and Human Rights Council. So the political climate for UN reform wasn't great then, and it isn't so great now either. How can political momentum be generated to ensure the strongest possible follow-up for the UN 75 political declaration to a plan of action that is at least or more forward-leaning as the UN 60 Summit outcome document, or as you mentioned, a revival for multilateralism? How do we make that happen in this time?
Well, I think you're right that the climate for reform was much better back in 2005 and 6 when I was President of General Assembly. It was a wonderful year. We got the Peace Building Commission, Human Rights Council, the Counterterrorism Act, and the CERF, the Central Emergency Revolving Fund, and inside the document was also R2P, Responsibility to Protect. So it was really a harvest of great magnitude. And Kofi Annan was Secretary General, I was PGA. We were very happy. It was really great. Although I think we should be proud today what happened in 2015 with the SDGs and the climate change agreement. And by the way, also the Iran agreement. So we had progress. But I think the situation today is also favorable now. If you had asked me last year, I would be more pessimistic. But today I am more pessimistic because you have the COVID-19 and everybody is asking what kind of life and world will we have after COVID? And that it gives you a lot of energy and how to define the road ahead. I also felt last year in particular that multilateralism was in a deep crisis, not least because of US actions. US is so important for the organization and for the world. But now we have a different direction. And I also feel that we, in our hearts, and hopefully also our brains, feel the dangers of polarization, of division, of continue to be split between nations and inside nations. We will just hurt ourselves. It's almost a suicidal action, or at least self-harm of great magnitude. So I think if we could sort of come to the conclusion that we simply cannot solve things alone. Alone is limited. You are limited. You are alone in all aspects of that word. But if you do it together, you have a tremendous energy coming. And I think that's what you have to mobilize. And for that is, of course, there is a need for leadership. There has to be leadership. By the way, on climate, I recommend you all to read line by line of the S.G. Guterres speech at Columbia University, 2nd of December, on the planet. It's one of the best speeches on the climate change that I've ever read. We need leadership also from nations and states. And I think if I look at the environmental field, that the signs are good from the US administration, the incoming US administration. European Union has a great green plan. Japan, South Korea, China, they're all moving. So we are having the wind in from the right direction, and let's just sail ahead now. And we need then women, we need youth on our side, tremendous potential in women and youth. That's two of my main reasons for hope. And then we have a tremendous help from the rising knowledge and education levels in the world. And lastly, if we go international and realize it's a national interest, I think we are on a safe course. But it requires a lot of work and a lot of persuasion and standing up for your beliefs and not waver in those regards.
All right, thank you so much for that. Well, hopefully we will all work together, use our voices, and keep pressing on to hopefully see a revival in multilateralism. But thank you once again, Ambassador, for your invaluable input and your time today.
Thank you very much. Good luck with the town hall and all the best to all of you, and have happy holidays, and then go to work next year, just the beginning. Decade of action, they say in the SDG language, but it's decade of action on all fronts: peace, development, and human rights. There's no peace without development, no development without peace, and none of the above without respect for human rights. You've heard it before, but go for it.
That's right. Thank you again. Well, moving along to our next session, We are on to our discussion. Again, just a reminder to all attendees, if you are wanting to participate in this, now is your time to put in your questions into the chat box, or if you would like to participate orally, please use the hands up function so that we can call upon you for your input. Well, today our moderator is Chanteline Carpentier from UNCTAD New York office, and she's the chief of UNCTAD New York office, and she will be moderating this session called Setting the Stage, the Current Context and the Role of Civil Society. Take it away, Chanteline.
Thank you so much, Jocelyn, and Ambassador Elianson, thank you so much for your very, as usual, inspiring comment. As you said, I'm the chief of the UNCTAD New York office, but I'm here because people that know me on this call know that I'm committed to CSO's role and convinced of their importance and their voice in the UN's work. And I want to thank my former colleagues from CSO to invite me to moderate this session. So today what we want to do is to celebrate and build on the role of civil society's engagement with the UN and its member state in light of UN 75, of course, but especially in the important circumstances that we are in, as Ambassador Jensen mentioned, and to galvanize multi-stakeholder engagement. And Ambassador said it, we can't do it alone. Each one of us can do a piece, but to get there by 2030, we have to work together. And we need to have a systemic engagement in actions to follow through on these commitments that have been made for the political declaration of UN at 75, but also the decade of action, as we just heard. I personally feel we're at a pivotal time in our democracies, and this COVID-19 crisis will leave lasting impact in developing countries, especially least developed countries. If you've seen UNCTAD latest report released last week, you'll see that. And we must act in solidarity, including through not just Green New Deal at the national level, but global Green New Deal that take into consideration that developing countries do not have the same fiscal space that we in our countries have to put in place the trillions of dollars of stimulus packages. And I would like to, that's my little voice and keyword, Dan, for this session. So as Jocelyn mentioned, we will use the fishbowl discussion approach, but adapted to COVID-19 for this session. And this will allow for more interactive conversation with the expert, but also with the participant. So we'll start with our 5 experts who will set the stage. And ladies and gentlemen, what expert do we have? Within these 5 minutes, they will share with us how to better engage CSOs and galvanize multi-stakeholder engagement, as I said, toward these systemic action and to follow through on these commitments. We will then have 3 respondents from CSOs in a rotating chair principle. And we will ask them to either ask a question of our expert or to share with us one thing they're doing or their ask of a specific stakeholder to implement these resolutions and make us closer to the world that we want. There's only 2 rules. The rules that these respondents have to stay within 1 minute, expert have to stay within 5 minutes, and respondents should not try to make a statement or on purpose change the conversation. And it's my role as moderator. I've been asked to keep us on subject and keep us on time. And I'll do that with the help of Monique, who is our technician here. In the extreme case, and I'm sure you're all very disciplined, we're not going to need that, but she could turn the microphone off if we were to need it. So without further ado, it's my delight to introduce not only somebody extraordinary that is we all know because she was part of and one of the leader of the negotiation of the SDGs as special envoy to the Secretary General on the SDGs, but also a dear friend, Her Excellency Miss Elizabeth Thompson, Ambassador and Permanent Representative of the Merchant of Barbados to the UN. So Ambassador Thompson, you have the floor for 5 minutes.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much, Chanteline, for your very kind introduction. I want to wish everybody a happy holidays and thank you for this invitation. I'm not sure, though, that I should be thanking you because this is a huge ask to do in 5 minutes, set context and role. So let me get to that because of the shortness of time. If you look at the UN Charter, it begins "We the peoples." and it sets out the broad vision. If you come back to the UN 75 declaration, the UN 75 declaration recommits to the broad vision elaborated in the charter, and then it speaks to the unfulfilled agenda. And if I had then to ask about role and context for SDGs, for CSOs, beg your pardon, I would say that this is where the civil society role comes in, to ensure that governments remain faithful to we, the peoples, as they fulfill or roll out and act on this unfulfilled agenda. So the role of the civil society remains to be a driver of action, to be part of the key ingredient which holds this global agreement and promise of action together, to be disruptive where necessary, to be innovative as necessary, to launch discourse that is global, that moves beyond governments, but forces governments to deal with the aspirations and the needs of the average person, so that you can be advocates, you can work for what we the peoples is intended to do. The whole charter of the UN is about the dignity of the human person and the bonds of the human family. And therefore the role of the civil society is to tighten those bonds and reinforce the interconnectedness of the human family. And in fact, that is what COVID has done. Whether we support multilateralism or not, the reality is COVID has proven to us that we are extremely interconnected as a global family, and that the whole notion of globalization isn't just about trade or business. It really is about the fact that we all live on the same planet, breathe the same air, have to use the same water, and Mother Nature is the source from which we draw energy and strength. And therefore, the responsibility of the civil society is twofold. One, to ensure that people are protected and that the planet is also protected, and that when we enjoy a shared prosperity, and that shared prosperity balances the needs of planet and balances the needs of people. Now, at 75, we can ask, what does the UN have to do? Does it include all of the peoples? There have been many geopolitical shifts. We've moved away from colonialism. The world is a very different place. Does the UN itself really reflect the new world and these geopolitical shifts? Does the UN itself operate for all of the peoples, or is it still an organization run by a minority who tell the majority what to do, but from which the majority don't necessarily benefit? And that is a question that I'm putting on the table, because civil society might want to look at how the UN operates and see if it can strengthen that. So again, it is catering, and the UN ensures that it is catering to all of the peoples. Peace and good governance. This is where civil society can have tremendous influence. Democratization of the UN and democratization of processes which lead to the dignity of the human person, so that every person has a voice, so that all of us have access to enabling technology which improves quality of life. How then do we ensure that the COVID, we learned the lesson from COVID, which is about the interconnectedness that I was talking about, which is about fostering and improving conditions for the human family, which is about protecting the planet. These are some of the lessons, and it is important that civil society share with us their vision and the people's vision, the vision of we the peoples for what the world ought to be like. Not what the world was like pre-COVID, but the kind of world that we all want to live in, the future that we want in the world that we want. And so civil society can help us redefine and reset where all humanity is going in the future. Human rights is ultimately about human dignity. So when we go back to the Charter, when we go back to the UN at 75 and the UN Declaration, ultimately the role of civil society is to work to ensure that all human beings have dignity and that the interconnectedness of the human family makes for the peace, prosperity, and high quality of life of every member of that human family. And I think I've exhausted my 5 minutes.
Thank you so much, Liz. That was awesome. And I'm not going to summarize, but I think clear marching order to CSOs is to look at whether the UN is still having a minority that rule the majority. That's a clear one. And going back to what Ambassador Eliasson was saying about this, shared prosperity, but within the planet capacity. Moving right along here to our second expert, Mr. Nasang Do, Counselor of Permanent Mission of the Republic of Korea to the UN. Please, you have the floor.
Yes, thank you. Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Madam Moderator, for the floor, and then also for the intriguing introduction. I also thank the organizer for convening this meaningful and important conversation. I'm very honored to share my perspective on the challenges of civil society and the possible roles that we can explore. Please be noted that this is my personal observation and it is not related with my government's official position. As for the current context of civil society, we are standing on a critical juncture on its way forward. This year is very special as we mark the 75th anniversary of the UN. We are also moving into the decade of action for the successful delivery of SDGs. And most of all, we are now fighting against the COVID-19 crisis. Under this background, I'd like to point out 3 main challenges of the civil society activities, mainly caused and amplified by the pandemic. First, shrinking of civic space. Relevant special procedure mandate holders have noted that civic space is shrinking both offline and online. There are many cases where COVID-19 is used as an excuse to restrict the activities of the civil society. The economic downturn caused by the pandemic also poses a challenge to the civil society's efforts to deliver their work to those in need. Second, inequalities such as digital divide. Digital platforms are the main avenue of participation and communication under the pandemic situation. So digital empowerment can provide greater opportunities of participation and engagement, and then it can help their voices be heard. Third, the prevalence of state-centric approaches to COVID-19. This approach can also pose a challenge to the status of global governance. If we put too much emphasis on the role of state in combating the COVID-19, it may run the risk of weakening global governance system. Therefore, it is essential to double our efforts to strengthen the global governance system and pursue solidarity and engagement of the civil society. Now I turn to the role of civil society. The UN has acknowledged the important role of civil society by several important documents, including COVID-19 Omnibus Resolution and Declaration of the 75th anniversary of the UN. Those documents highlight the importance of civil society in addressing global challenges and ensuring the successful delivery of SDGs. I would like to define the role of civil society as implementation partner and then human rights defender and watchdog and monitors. civil society has comparative advantages in hearing the voices from the ground, and then they can provide the first-hand knowledge and information to governments and intergovernmental organizations. Civil society can also play a crucial role in defending the human rights of those people, those vulnerable groups. Human rights defenders can stand to advocate the rights of those individuals and groups being victimized. Lastly, civil society monitors and evaluates the actions of government and intergovernmental organizations, and they can raise flags to ensure accountability and democratic governance. These are all important values that the UN is now pursuing. I think I should start here. I'm happy to have further discussion. Thank you, Madam Moderator.
Thank you so much, Mr. Sangdek, and couldn't agree more with you. And as you mentioned, the role of civil society increasingly, as the UN work at the country level increase, is more and more important. And I'm glad to say that within the reform, our UN country team now have all one person that's in charge of looking who is left behind. It's not perfect yet, but the fact that it's there. So thank you so much for member state like you that allows us to have that. And these are people that this group should reach out to at the country level. Without further ado, let me move on to our next expert, who everybody knows, of course, Mr. Craig Mukenber, Director of the New York Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights. Craig, pleasure to have you. You have the floor.
Thank you. What a pleasure to be here, and good morning to everybody. And thanks for this great conversation. Well, I want to say, as we prepare tomorrow to have this annual celebration of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights on Human Rights Day, that I think this time it's taking place in the context of what is the most important battle of ideas, perhaps since 1945. And I want to explain a little bit about that. Because if you remember what the ideas are at the heart of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, these ideas that all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights, that we're all entitled to freedom from fear and freedom from want without discrimination on the basis of race, sex, language, religion, political opinion, or other status, that I have the right to be free from the fear that a criminal will extort me, or a police officer will kneel on my neck until I die, or that a corporation will poison my water or destroy my climate. And ideas like that healthcare and housing and water and sanitation and food and decent labor conditions are human rights to which we are all entitled without discrimination, not commodities for sale to those who can afford them, not privileges that you have to be born into, but actual human rights. That idea is very much under stress at the moment. And if you consider that as we're commemorating the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, we are living in a moment when we've brought all of the principal challenges of the 20th century with us. Challenges like racism and colonialism and genocide and slavery and torture, and then layered on top of them new challenges to our human rights, everything from the abuse of technology to mass surveillance to the climate crisis, to feudal levels of inequalities in all of our societies around the world. You realize just how important that struggle is. And I think we have to say that 2020, this year in particular, has shown us that ours is not the only idea out there, that the human rights idea is challenged by powerful ideas from the other side as well. Ideas like corporatism and racial white supremacy and authoritarianism and colonialism and imperialism, racism and xenophobia, sexism and homophobia, Islamophobia, anti-Semitism, religious intolerance of all kinds. Those ideas not only have lingered throughout this period, but they've gained new strength in recent years, and I think in 2020 in particular. So this really is a struggle of ideas in which the role of civil society is the most crucial role of all, I believe. And I think that one of the things that we've seen as a result of the COVID pandemic over the last year is that it's stripped back the very thin veneer of human rights that covered up for a lot of people the massive inequalities and the massive human rights failures in our society, both institutional and cultural in all of our societies. the virus is not a non-discriminatory virus, as some people like to say. In fact, it has proven itself in its effects to be racist and ageist and classist, hitting hardest minority groups, hitting hardest older persons, hitting hardest those of lower socioeconomic status, also closely mirroring with race in all of our societies. And I think that either we can resign at this moment, and I hope we won't, or we'll realize that at this moment, there is an opportunity to rebuild in a better way, to mobilize all actors in society to push for a society that actually guarantees freedom from fear and freedom from want, as the Universal Declaration promised all of those 72 years ago. And to realize the Universal Declaration of Human Rights in practice, healthcare as a human right for all persons everywhere, racial justice and social justice and environmental justice and peace, instead of the militarism that's dominating societies across the world now. Everywhere as we speak, actors in civil society, activists and human rights defenders and community organizations are helping us to get there. That's for sure, but there's so much more that needs to be done, and a very narrow window, both of time and opportunity in which to do it. I think we are right to be looking at a role that civil society can be playing also within the UN. We know that this is a normative argument based upon freedom of expression and association, participation, information, and so on. We know it's a political imperative of pushing the levers of change that won't happen through member states alone. We know that civil society space is shrinking everywhere in all regions, and also in the United Nations and its institutions as well, where that space has challenged. We know that reprisals against those participating in the UN are at an all-time high. We need to look beyond the ECOSOC Human Rights Committee, as we've said in these discussions in the past, I think, to change that. We need to press for more webcast and transparency in everything that happens in the UN, to expand virtual participation, which 2020 has shown us is not exceptional. It can be a normal mode of work, and we need to expand that in all areas of United Nations activity. I think we need to facilitate public access, encourage more meetings away from UN headquarters. We need to open up space for public demonstrations around the UN as well, promote more NGO participation, civil society participation in the mechanisms of the UN on boards and working groups. We need to strengthen our protection mechanisms, of course, and make sure that we use the capacities we have at country level to provide a convening space for civil society to participate in their own societies as well. And I want to say, as a last point on this one, none of these things happening at the global level will be a substitute for national level action by civil society. Whatever capacities we have at the global level, we also have to be using to support civil society actors at the national level to change national level policy and the positions of individual governments around human rights questions in international fora. We need to occupy as much space as we can.
Let me interrupt you, because you can come back to this in the Q&A. I don't want to take the time away from other people. I'm sorry. This is
absolutely not. And I think all of this is absolutely essential to raising the voice of civil society. And I thank you for my 5 minutes. Back to you.
Thank you so much, Craig. And don't worry, we'll come back. And one of the things I'm asking myself, because there's one common thread so far, which is this fundamental right to an environment adequate to our health and our well-being, but also perhaps to our health and access to healthcare and others. And some countries and provinces and states have changed their bylaws to include those. And perhaps that could be one way that civil society could push for, so that it lends it at the country regional level as well. So without further ado, let me open the floor to Ms. Rachel Pittman, Executive Director of the UN Association of USA. Rachel, you have the floor.
Great, thank you. And my name is Rachel Bowen Pittman. I'm the Executive Director of the United Nations Association of the United States of America, UNA USA, and thank you so much for inviting me here today. I'm very honored to be part of this town hall because it represents the heart of UNA USA's mission, which is to educate, inspire, and mobilize individuals to support the principles and vital work of the UN and its agencies. And I just thought I'd share my thoughts on how, as UN advocates, we can mobilize even in a time of a pandemic. Over 75 years ago, the American Association for the United Nations, which later became UNA USA, and 41 other organizations advocated for the UN's formation through partnership and persistent lobbying. And our mission was driven by the belief that nations working together through the UN are the best hope for peace and progress for all. And in its 75th anniversary, we're still lifting up the voices of the UN. And there's so much at stake, and the impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic must be addressed. As UN advocates, we must never lose hope for achieving the most peaceful and prosperous and sustainable world. And yes, we're in a pandemic, but we must find creative ways to work with our local, national, and global communities to face the many challenges exacerbated by COVID-19 and put us back on a pathway towards sustainability and progress. You know, for some, creativity is using online platforms like we are today with Zoom to establish new connections with global issues experts from the United Nations and NGOs to expand our knowledge of some of the most pressing global issues and help us become more effective advocates for the UN. For others, like the UNA USA chapters in our Council of Organizations, it's continuing these discussions with their partners in civil society and governments and everyday citizens by hosting anything like online coffee chats, so panel discussions and podcasts, just so that we can continue to be informed and become better advocates. But also, we need to use our creativity to lift up our voices as UN advocates during this pandemic. For instance, UNA USA members, we're holding virtual meetings with our members of Congress and their staff to continue to advocate for full US funding for the UN. We are sending online petitions to our elected officials to let them know that we oppose our current administration's short-sighted and dangerous decision to withdraw from the World Health Organization. Like many of you, we're using our voices through consultations like the UN 75 consultations to share our visions for the future with the United Nations so we can work together to create the future we want. Through virtual town halls and social media, we're denouncing racial injustice against Black people in the US and around the world and educating ourselves on ways we can help end systematic and systemic racism. And lastly, we have not lost sight that this year marks the beginning of the decade of action. The pandemic has reversed a lot of the world's progress toward the global goals, but our commitment to achieving the 2030 agenda has only become stronger. And in summary, this pandemic will not hold us back from building a resilient and sustainable future. When we eventually recover from the COVID-19 pandemic, the world won't look the same as it did before, and it is our task to make sure it looks better. The pandemic has certainly thrown some hurdles our way, but our community is resilient, and our commitment to the global engagement continues to move us forward toward a brighter future for everyone, everywhere. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rachel. Couldn't agree with you more. And thank you for all the work you're doing with Congress. This is extremely important. We all know that. It reminds me of Ambassador Thompson. Liz said, CSO needs to change the narrative. And I reminded yesterday, the study came out of what are the words that have been used more on the internet in 2020. Of course, COVID-19 was the first one, but Black Lives Matter came out, I believe second. And our government are increasingly using artificial intelligence to span the web to see what are the key issues, and civil society, by making sure they have that narrative online, can actually influence our government that way as well. Without further ado, let us move now to our last but not the least, for sure, expert, Ms. Tetet Mera Loran, climate activist from the Philippines and advisor to Rosa Luxembourg Stiftung. Tetet, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Chantaline, and good evening to everyone. I'm very happy to be part of this panel, and just listening to the previous speakers, my heart is so full because it's so reassuring, the messages around how indispensable civil society is in development. To say that we're facing extremely difficult and challenging circumstances is an understatement. Now, the profound impacts of the pandemic surely has hit civil society and social movements very hard. From mobilizing in great numbers in 2019 until the early part of this year, we are now faced with lockdown isolations. Much of our work have become even harder. Activities have been put on hold, and communities we work with became very difficult to reach. So we are very, very challenged. How do you now mobilize social solidarity in an era of physical distancing? From asking the big questions around power or the lack of it, we are now starting, or we have refocused our energies on emergency response to urgent issues that communities face, like hunger, joblessness, illness, displacement, and massive violations of human rights. We continue to explore and adapt new ways of organizing, mobilizing, expressing our resistance to huge power imbalances that the pandemic exposed and magnified. But then again, you see that we face a surge of rights restrictions and violations, many of these imposed under the pretext of pandemic response. I come from the Philippines, no? I should know. That is the experience, that's our lived reality day in and day out, where critical voices are silenced, intimidated, arrested, and killed. Civil society organizations that are dependent on program and project funding face serious constraints and even threats to their very existence and survival. So it's a very, very difficult time. That's the context that we find ourselves in. As for the role, I would say that civil society actors are storytellers and dream weavers. We are storytellers. Pre-pandemic, we were telling the world and its leaders how women, indigenous peoples, workers, persons with disabilities, farmers are deeply affected by the multi-layered vulnerabilities due to inequality, poverty, exclusion, environmental degradation, climate breakdown, the repression of civic and political freedoms, and even the surge of macho fascism. Now, we were questioning how unjust the world's economic order is, where the world's richest 1% have more than twice as much wealth as 6.9 billion people in this planet. Pre-COVID, we were already raising alarm bells. How privatized healthcare is beyond the reach of people. And around 10,000 people die every day from the lack of access to healthcare pre-COVID times. Or how unpaid care work done by women is estimated to be around 10.8 trillion US dollars every year, which is 3 times the size of the global tech industry. So through our research, advocacy, and campaigns, we organize and mobilize communities on how power imbalances are contributing to the dispossession, displacement, and disempowerment of people. We have stories from the ground on how institutions at local, national, regional, and global levels have failed and continue to leave people behind. Civil society has a seat at the table. We fought for that. But even though we have a seat at the table, we often find ourselves still on the menu. No? We continue to strive to build power anchored on speaking truth to power. So our main narrative is, how can a system that puts profits above people and planet be fixed by cosmetic solutions? And this is the story that we're trying to rewrite. We are trying to reclaim our voices and those who have been silenced and intimidated. So let's have an honest conversation here. One cannot green capitalism and expect that markets, corporations, and institutions to provide solutions to the very problems that they have created and intensified. That is why calls for stronger solidarity, international cooperation, climate positive recovery, within the frame of the dominant economic model would ring hollow. So I said civil society actors are dream weavers. Too often, governments and business leaders view civil society as an adversary rather than a valuable partner in development. Civil society has been in the front lines of crisis response while still holding governments and corporations to account on the quality of response and insisting that rights be held and protected. We are trying to build a better post-pandemic world that works for everyone, especially those that are left behind. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you, Tete. Thank you so much for this. And indeed, we need to change the narrative. And I couldn't agree with you more being at UNCTAD that putting the profit ahead of people and planet to try to fix it at the margin, it ain't going to happen. We need a systemic change to the economic and financial system that we have for these changes to happen. But I don't want to take more time. Now we're moving to the innovative part of this thing, which is the fishbowl. So I'm going to invite, and I see we already have one, Vicky Salmon. So 1 minute, introduce yourself quickly, and then your ask or your question. Then we're going to have Courtney Bickert and Volker Lemon. Vicky, you have the floor.
Thank you. I'm Vicky Smallman, and I'm with the Canadian Labour Congress in Ottawa, Canada. And I'm happy to be here on behalf of the trade union movement because we really see ourselves as key partners and problem solvers in helping develop the solutions to some of the challenges that we're facing collectively right now. And in fact, the principle of solidarity is a core union value that we try to model every day. I wonder whether the panelists could reflect on, in considering the question of how to open up the space and how to ensure that we're putting the needs or centering the needs of those most impacted by our collective challenges at the heart of the conversations that we have, whether we might look at the tripartite nature of the International Labour Organization as a model for the kind of decision-making that we could bring into other spaces. You know, if you look at the new convention, Aiello Convention 190 on violence and harassment in the world of work, you can really see that there is a possibility to actually establish and advance human rights, even in a very challenging multilateral space. And we were able to achieve that because of unions. So let's try and see if we can bring that into other spaces. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Giving the floor now to Courtney. Courtney, you have 1 minute. Go ahead.
Hi, thank you so much for the honor to be here today. This is an amazing session. My name is Courtney Bickert. I'm the Executive Director of the Empowering a Billion Women Foundation and our lead initiative, COVID-X Now, which is a great network of solution-minded folks from around the globe working to support disadvantaged and diverse communities and women-led initiatives through and beyond COVID. But one of the things that has really struck me is the human-centeredness that has come out of today's discussion. And I think Ambassador Eliasson put it very well. You know, humans are at the center of what is happening. And I think with COVID-19, what has happened, and as Craig said, it is really stripping back the very thin veneer of issues that we've all been facing.
Ask your question. You've already exceeded your 1 minute.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. Yes, my question is, and to Rachel, can you give us one example or best idea of how to really engage with the UN as civil society organizations?
Thank you. And may I ask everybody, just dispense of the niceties and the protocol, because you have 1 minute, so just go for it. So Volker Lemon, please come in. Volker, are you with us? There you are.
I hope I'm visible and audible now.
Yes.
So let me get to a heretical question immediately. We are always hosting a so-called Fall Academy, FAS Fall Academy, some 15 young policy activists coming from all over the world to New York in the fall to learn about the UN. And the question that I always get asked, and it is maybe the question also to ask here, why should people who are involved in their day-to-day political struggle in their home countries, they are environmental activists, they are trade unionists, healthcare workers from all walks of life, we have them in New York to learn about the UN. Why should they care about the UN? They have one life, they have one, I would say, amount of political capital to spend. Why should they divert some of their political capital to the United Nations and not keep it in their domestic or regional context and work on their problems and solve them there?
Thank you so much, and thank you for sticking to your time. So we're going to go now to our expert, I believe. No, we probably don't have time to do that. We're just going to keep going with we'll ask the expert to be patient and take note, and I'll try to help you. Moving along to Sasha Gabizian, good old friend. Please, Sasha, come in.
Hi, people. Great to see you. It's been so long. We were fighting alongside for the Sustainable Development Goals, which are such a wonderful framework which we have. So I'm really glad to see you after 5 years and getting ready to push for the next 5 years. That's really what my question is about. But I just wanted to also to share anger and hope. Yeah, I think I've seen myself with a lot of anger around how the pandemic has worsened inequalities, how resources are going to big corporations, how wars have been started in the middle of the pandemic in the hope the world would not look at, what would be happening in Nagorno-Karabakh, for example. But I have a lot of hope, I have really hope about youth activism, the Fridays for Future movement, the Black Lives Matter movement. I see more and more solidarity standing up with those whose rights have been trampled, indigenous peoples, Dalit, trans person, Uyghurs. So I think that activism has been very empowering, but it's also often still a dirty word and a dangerous word in many of the countries.
I've exceeded you 1 minute. Can you ask your question? Sorry, Sasha.
My question is, we need multilateralism. Yeah, we need these binding and these frameworks for business and governments. But I'm afraid that the SDGs are going to be put on the sides, and governments, especially from the global north, might be saying, hey, we have so much to do after COVID. So my question to the panel is, how can we get these governments back on track and not let them off the hook and keep our work on the SDGs as a red?
Thank you. Thank you so much, Sasha. Good to see you. Roberto, another good friend for the Tranché work on SDGs. Roberto Borrero, please come in. Roberto, I see your icon. There you go.
Thank you very much, Chantal. My name is Roberto Borrero, representing the United Confederation of Taino People and Indigenous Peoples Organization. Thank you to all the panelists and the questions so far. My thoughts were going more towards the UN 75 declaration and the calls in the declaration to strengthen global governance. And just considering the time period that we're in, where we're in an age of misinformation and false news, that kind of call can be disconcerting to some, especially when we don't see or understand within the declaration how we're calling for accountability for global governance, and also how ethics are being brought into the conversation. There's very little mention of ethics anywhere in the SDGs, in the Secretary General's statements or this declaration. So how do the panelists see alleviating fears in this time of misinformation on global government, and are there pathways to show and move forward with accountability and ethics? Is this, for example, something about strengthening the international justice institutions, for example, or are there other pathways? Thank you.
Thank you, Roberto. Great question. Alan Ware. Alan Ware is next on my list. If I don't see Alan take the floor, I will move to Richard Ponzio.
Hi, Richard Ponzio from the Stimson Center's Just Security 2020 program, proud partner of UN 2020 and Together First. Question for Mr. Sang Diok, the second panelist. You highlighted the important role of civil society as an implementing partner, human rights defender, holding governments accountable. On that third point, and the follow-on policymaking that we expect now for the post-UN 75 process, I'm glad that you and Craig highlighted shrinking civil society space. It's happening, of course, at the national level, as documented by Civicus publications, but it's the experience that many of us faced, partly the constraints posed by COVID, having to go virtual, but the access to governments and the direct engagement on policymaking was limited at best. How can we learn from UN 75, the work on the declaration, on the next phase, especially if there's a possibility of an intergovernmental process to take forward the commitments in the declaration?
Thank you so much for your conciseness and the great question. Simon Filippini, are you here with us? Simon going once, going twice. Okay, I'm not seeing Simon. So what I would like to do is to go back to my expert, If I see, perhaps Dan, you can tell me if I have some specific question, maybe just text them to me. Oh, okay, I can unmute them if you like. Okay, so Dan has 5 persons. So why don't, Dan, you just choose them in the order they came to you. You have 1 minute, and Dan, just go ahead with 1 person. Just say who you are and go ahead.
So we will go with Jeanette, Amal, and Corey. Sorry to interrupt.
Hello, good morning. My question is how in this time of COVID, I definitely agree with Greg Monover, who talked about the curtain being moved back, and we're seeing the massive exploitation on gender-based violence across the world. It's, I agree, it's not so much that it's happening so much more, but that we're seeing it so much more. But one of the things that I'm an advocate for the Nordic model, which is the only proven model now adopted by 8 countries that stems the demand for sex trafficking and prostitution, which garners the massive amount of money that we see going into organized crime. I would like to see the United Nations get behind and promote the Nordic model, because we are never going to be able to provide the amount of resources for all of these victims. We have to stop the waterfall.
Thank you.
We have to hold them accountable.
Thank you, Janet. I think this question is very clear and it's a very important issue. Dan, can we move on to the next person as a question or comment or proposal, rather?
Go right ahead, Corey.
Hi there, Corey Buitt. I'm a global governance advocate, and I'm concerned with the complex web that we see of pressures on society with climate change, other existential threats, growing nationalism and protectionism as a result of that, and we form sort of a web that locks us into policy that we can't really change. So how can we expect to change or to achieve like a dynamic global policy to effectively respond proactively and reactively to these kinds of existential threats?
Thank you so much. Moving along so we can get as many people as possible.
Go ahead, Dr. Colleen.
Oh, okay. My question is, I'm listening to it all, and I've been part of these conversations for a long time. So the question is, what could be different in our approach if we saw the chaos as human life trying to come through? If we looked at human bondedness as the base of security and peace building, from a psychospiritual perspective, I would be interested in part of bringing that forward to the UN and what would be the best way to do that.
Thank you. Very good point. Dan, do we still have 1 or 2 more?
We'll go with 1 more. Barbara, you can go ahead. And sorry to those others on the list. Barbara, go ahead.
Yes, hello and good morning. I am very, very impressed with what you're doing. It's vital for humanity. I'm the president of the United Nations Women for Peace. We actually are in place with our mission to stop violence against women and girls. And we're starting a campaign now, Men as Partners for Women, Peace and Security. And what I would like to know is your organization, your UN 75, what is the fastest avenue that we can engage with you to promote this mission, this campaign, to deconstruct the DNA of violence?
Thank you so much. All right, so I think we had excellent round of questions. And let me just, I don't want to summarize them, but I think there was this issue of the model of Aiello as a tripartite approach to many of these issues, the human-centeredness, how do we ensure that? Can't read myself here. How do we bring back solidarity and ensure that government go back to the prescience of the SDGs? How do we ensure there's accountability and ethics in the delivery? an intergovernmental process to implement the resolution. And I'd like to highlight here that one thing that comes to mind when I see this is we're seeing all these platforms being created for the private sector, bankable projects, and to match the projects with the financing. Why can't we have something similar for civil society? You all have great solution. You've all presented some of the campaign and advocacy you're doing and could use support. Maybe we need something like that. I will now ask each of our experts within 1 minute to respond to these questions. I know it's challenging, but I know you all can do it too. So why don't we start in the same order we had? Liz, please come in.
Thank you very much, Chantalyn. So you've given me an even harder task this time. I think a couple things. One is that in the opening comments, all of the experts spoke to themes, whether it was accountability, advocacy, etc., themes and role for civil society, and the questions just fall into those broad categories. I think that really the question is one of process, and it is now for civil society to demand that the UN reopens or opens the space rather than shrinks it. And the irony of COVID is that it has, we have learned that the technology really has the capacity to bring us together and have conversations that are not limited to being in the UN, that are not limited by the number of conference rooms available. And therefore, the civil society organizations need to spawn grassroots organizations and to demand that the UN is less opaque and opens this space up so that civil society can have access using the technology, because that is now how more people will get to engage with the UN and through it with their governments. And to ensure and to be able to, that governments are faithful, which is the accountability, and to bring it to global attention when they're not. So I think that covers really a lot of the questions. I do like the idea of the continued advocacy on existential threats and the notion of pointing out failures of institutions. But for me, the question is, all of these fall into the broad categories that have been set. It really is a question now of how, and I think that the answer to the how is the technology, but you have to get the UN to use it so that governments and the UN itself can be more transparent and pressured to be faithful to we the peoples.
Thank you so much, Ambassador. Moving to Nas Sandok. Mr. Sandok, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. And then I thank for the useful and very insightful comments and questions. Indeed, they are very much inspirational, and then we can share very diverse perspectives. And then in response to the question raised by Mr. Richard Poncio about the intergovernmental process, how to engage more civil society in this process, I would like to say that partnership is pivotal in this process. If I share kind of one example of this process is that Interagency Standing Committee Forum on Humanitarian Coordination. In this mechanism, civil society is a part of the structure, and then it is engaging with the United Nations in its policy-making process. I think we can further continue this process on a digital platforms. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for this specific example. Moving right along, Craig, I'm sure you have a zillion idea. Go ahead.
I don't know about a zillion in a minute, but a couple of ideas. One is I like very much the idea of looking ways to increase the level of participation of labor unions in the deliberations of the UN beyond the Aiello. I'd be very careful about looking to replicate that tripartite structure, because one of the challenging trends of these recent years has been the increased influence of corporations and business entities in the work of the United Nations in fields in which, frankly, from my perspective, the focus should be on regulating them, not on negotiating with them when it comes to the impact on the climate and on human rights. So not to directly replicate that, and instead to look for ways to have civil society occupy the space that they have. And just to tag on here, another problem here is a part of that space being occupied not just by corporations, but by gongos and prongos and organizations that purport to be NGOs. Some even pretend to be human rights organizations, when in fact they exist to oppose the human rights agenda. And that's become a growing problem, and their occupying space should be taken by real people. On this issue that Roberto raised about accountability for global governance and accountability of the member states in particular, I would just say that's why it's so important to support the UN human rights mechanisms, which are unique in the system because they're about accountability of states for their behavior toward their people. And all of those mechanisms are now under threat for budgetary reasons as well as for political reasons. They run on the fuel of civil society. That needs to be protected as well. Last thing, I'm all for ethics on this, but I also think it's really important not to lose what's been built over the last 72 years, which is law. Human rights law is where the real accountability comes from. Ethical considerations have a place, but never to replace hard law and hard accountability. Back to you.
Thank you so much, Greg. And indeed, the human right model and the peer review should be expanded. Great point. Rachel, please come in.
Yes, so I was asked about examples of how civil society can directly engage the UN. I would say one is that from time to time, the UN will call for input. Obviously, we just went through the UN 75 discussions and consultations. Another example is the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights just did a call for input on racial injustices in your country. So we did that as well. We put together a report and submitted it. I would say there are a lot of UN conferences that are open to civil society that I encourage you to participate in. And then the other thing is, just like today, we're using Zoom, invite a UN official to come talk directly to your members. I'm finding that they're more open and willing because it's very easy to do today. And in regards to ethics and making sure it's still in the conversations, I do agree that law is very important, but we have this great document called the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. I think that covers a lot of issues that we need to continually to look back to as we advocate for humanitarian issues. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Tete, please come in.
Yes, thank you very much. Just a few words. Now, civil society exposes wrongdoings, we oppose wrongdoings, but we also propose solutions. And that is why civil society is now calling for the UN to convene an economic reconstruction and systemic transformation summit so that we can talk about macro solutions, recognizing the interlinkages between the macro, the meso, and micro issues. So we're hoping that this call for, an honest conversation about systemic changes that need to be undertaken in the economic, trade, finance, investments, architecture can happen. And only then can we hope for a batting chance, to emerge stronger in a post-pandemic world.
Thank you so much, Tete. And I want to thank everyone. I'm not going to summarize because I know there's note takers and they're going to share that, but I want to thank our expert. As everyone has contributed, everyone is listening. I think we have quite a few point of entry for moving forward. And thank you for keeping on time. I think we're like 4 minutes late and we started late, so I feel pretty good about that. So over to you, Jocelyn, I believe.
Thank you, Chantaline. That was amazing moderation, especially with all the rapid fire questions that were happening. You did an excellent job, and it's so good to see the passion that's come through from our respondents and also our experts. So thank you, everyone who was involved in that session. Moving along to a more lighter note and more relaxing, peaceful time, we have an amazing young person, Miss Luna Abu Yunus, a 14-year-old Palestinian-Israeli violinist with Fridays for Future and Strike for Future from Israel, giving us a little musical interlude for now. Take it away. you so much. That was truly incredible. And next we have Mr. Songa Bahati Manasseh, a 21-year-old spoken word artist, poet, activist, refugee, social entrepreneur from the Democratic Republic of Congo and Uganda.
Like an enigma, life is. To that it is not easy to understand some life issues. Like a flower when I start to fade. I'm not afraid because changes will be made. A young man, even if I'm swimming in difficult life, I never give up. I just keep my head up because tomorrow, songs of victory will be sung in my memory. Nobody chooses to run away from his motherland. Nobody chooses to be a refugee. That's why I still stand with all energy. I still stand. I still stand because I've come to understand that even if I'm far away from my motherland, I should not overspend my precious time to complain about my sorrows and pains. Because this way, I will never gain. I still stand, still work hard and train, even when it rains, and I expect this way I will gain, then overcome my pains. I still stand. I still walk out in the corridor of hope. Nobody can make me stop, because perseverance is my job. I still stand to the success by stop, waiting for that spice which will make my problems and bring the full stop. No matter who I am, no matter what I am, a refugee, a national, a Christian, a born again, a Muslim, an atheist, a black, a white man, all those names are innocent. I still stand 100%. No matter how difficult
Good
my
evening,
challenge, I still stand
sound
challenge.
room audience and people. Good to see you back again. I hope you had
Because
a
it's my hope.
wonderful
It's my
Thanksgiving.
hope that Israelis didn't
And
drop.
I know
The
things
fight
are going
against
to get
slavery stop. Even if there was a minority
worse before they
fighting the
get better.
poverty, they fight it for
But
their liberty.
we're all in this
my hope.
together, so let's,
It's my hope that Nelson Mandela
mass,
maintained his
do what we
passion,
have to do
fighting against discrimination and
fight this
segregation
until
between
the
different population of his
vaccines
nation.
start
It's my hope.
kicking in.
It's my hope that Patricia.
All right, thank you so much to these young artists for their performances. As we move along, just a quick reminder that the document for key concepts and key concepts that have stood out or keywords that have stood out is still there. So please fill that out as this discussion goes along. Also, thank you for all the participation in the last session. You may continue to do so with using the raising your hands function and also the Q&A question function as well. So without further ado, I would like to introduce our next moderator, Ms. Mintu Pham, co-founder of New American Voices, The Path Ahead, who will be on moderating the discussion, The Path Ahead, the potential and opportunities for civil society engagement. Mintu, you can take the floor.
Hi, everyone. Great to be here. And that was such an inspiring panel, this last one. I'm really happy to be here. Over the last year, I've been deeply engaged with civil society here in the United States on the recent November election. And it was great to see that some of those, the momentum that's come out of the United States is being felt across the world. So I'm really happy to moderate this next session on the path ahead. We've got a number of speakers, so I'm just going to get right to it. I think you all should know the rules by now. We have 5 minutes from each of our expert speakers, and then we'll go to a rotating set of civil society respondents. So we're going to start with Ambassador Enestrom from Sweden, who I had the privilege of working with during the World Summit in 2005 and implementation of that when she was working with Jan Eliasson, who we had the pleasure to hear from earlier today. So I will give her the floor. Ambassador Enestrom?
I'm sorry, and the ambassador will be a minute late, so if we could go ahead to the next person and then come back to her.
Okay, great. Thanks for letting me know. So We will hear from Ambassador Adela Raz of the Permanent Mission of Afghanistan. Please go ahead.
Hi, can you hear me?
I can, great.
Okay, wonderful. So let me first of all thank you, Ms. Mentempam, for the kind introduction and giving me the floor. I am very delighted to join this global town hall in observance of Human Rights Day. Many thanks to the UN 2020 Civil Society Partnership for organizing the event and inviting me to speak. I am honored to join this panel with so many dear friends and colleagues. As we celebrate the 75th anniversary of the United Nations, global leaders must seize the opportunity and meet the moment. People in civil society around the world, from Afghanistan till here, clearly understands the value of global cooperation and expect the UN to help solve global problems. Through recent reports, we have seen that the vast majority of people believe that international cooperation is vital to deal with our current challenges and see the UN as an essential tool and organization in tackling these problems. So how we move forward? I believe we need to work with and through a broader network of stakeholders. This notion is reflected within the UN 75 Political Declaration, which was so skillfully facilitated by Anna Karin, who will be joining later as I hear, and Ali Al-Thani, the PRs of Sweden and Qatar. It's also central in the COVID-19 Omnibus Resolution, which I had the great honor to co-coordinate with my dear colleague Ivan, the PR of Croatia. The resolution recognizes the important role of civil society and encourages member states to engage through the establishment of a participatory and transparent multi-stakeholder platforms and partnerships. It also requests the Secretary General to work with relevant stakeholders and mobilize the UN's network of partnership to support member states. By providing a common narrative framework that places participation and inclusion at its center, I hope that the Omnibus Resolution can have a direct impact on the work of the UN. For example, it could be used as an advocacy tool by civil society and other actors, including the Secretariat and UN funds and programs to promote participatory approaches to programs and policies at the country, regional, and global levels. Additionally, it adds to a growing normative body of work by the General Assembly that recognizes the need for further civil society participations. Slow progress and the development of these common norms contribute towards building consensus for a more open UN. This will hopefully contribute to the necessary support for more wide-ranging reforms in the near future. A more inclusive and effective UN is especially important for countries like Afghanistan that suffer from armed conflict and widespread of poverty. We know that our hope for a peaceful, prosperous, and self-reliant Afghanistan is impossible without more effective and inclusive multilateralism. We also know the benefits of civil society participation, and especially in peace building. In Afghanistan, we have seen great success from community-led development and peace initiatives. The government is therefore expanding our Citizens Charter program to support people who are vulnerable to structural risks and whose livelihoods are affected by COVID-19 pandemic, and empowering communities to identify, plan, manage, and monitor development projects. The program is also implemented through community development councils, which currently includes 250,000 elected members, which 49% of them are women. In closing, I want to emphasize that the pandemic has clearly shown the need for unity and solidarity, especially for the most vulnerable people in countries. Afghan women, youth, and minorities, and their brothers and sisters around the world need the United Nations to stand firm and strong. If we fail, we will not recover from the pandemic, reach the Sustainable Development Goals, or meet the expectation of people of the world. I thank you, Madam Coordinator.
Great. I'm not sure where my video is, but we're going to move on to Ambassador Shimonovic of Croatia. Ambassador?
Thank you, Madam Moderator. I can't start up my video. Can you please unblock me?
Monique, are we able to start Ambassador Shimonovich's video?
He should have a prompt to
Oh, there
turn
we
there
go.
you go.
Yes, yes.
Oh, we lost you.
Oh, there you are. All right, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. Dear civil society friends, it is a great pleasure to meet you again, albeit virtually. Of course, COVID-19 is to blame. There is no better way to mark the Human Rights Day than the interactive dialogue with you. I firmly believe that if we want to overcome COVID-19 pandemic and its social, economic, and political consequences, and to build back better, the civil society must play a larger role in the United Nations as well as in all our societies. We cannot allow that economic hardships negatively reflect on financial support to civil society and affect its highly important work, nor for its political space to shrink. For years, I have witnessed the power of the civil society. I have seen how you helped to push through the Convention on Prohibition of Landmines, overcoming widespread pessimism among member states. I have seen how you pressed member states to accept the establishment of the International Criminal Court against all odds. More recently, I have seen your power in current efforts to curb climate change and carry through the SDGs agenda. Dear friends, we need all that power, and we need it now to ensure that the omnibus resolution on comprehensive and coordinated approach to COVID-19 pandemic adopted this September is implemented. As my dear co-coordinator of the work on this resolution, Adela, already mentioned, it emphasizes the importance of solidarity, multilateralism, inclusiveness, as well as human rights. The role of civil society in its implementation is indispensable. On a short run, if we want affordable vaccines, if we want to protect vulnerable ones first, if we want to leave no one behind, you will need to push for it. On a long run, if we want the One Health approach, the approach that brings together the health of planet, the health of animals, and the health of people to prevail, you will have to push for it. It was painful for me to see the narrow, limited participation of civil society in the special session of the General Assembly devoted to COVID-19. As always, you have done a very good job within these limits, providing that you are proving that you are indispensable in making the UN accountable to the peoples it serves. Let me use this Human Rights Commemoration to suggest that some good practices on including civil society in the work of the Human Rights Council in Geneva should also be considered in the work of the United Nations bodies in New York. That would be a strong boost to the civil society in New York and help the United Nations to build back better. Dear friends, happy Human Rights Day tomorrow. On the 72nd anniversary of the adoption of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, let me express the following birthday wish. More inclusion of the civil society in the work of the UN in New York. The UN needs you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ambassador. And it's striking to hear you who have spent so much time and done such important work with the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights to say these words, especially on the eve of the commemoration. And I also was encouraged to hear you use a phrase from, at least here in the United States, has been thrown around a lot, which is build back better, which not only applies to the US, but obviously to the UN as well. So I think we now have Ambassador Enestrom of Sweden, who I had the pleasure of working with during the World Summit outcome and its implementation. Ambassador, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, and great to see you again. And my apologies for arriving late, but I was celebrating another anniversary. That is the that. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, good, great. Yeah. No, I was celebrating another anniversary, and that is 5 years since the Security Council resolution on youth, peace and security. So my apologies, but it's I'm very happy to be here to observe and celebrate the Human Rights Day, which is tomorrow, of course. So thank you so much for the invitation, and I'm really honored to participate, and also with my dear colleagues Adela and Ivan that preceded me. I like to focus on two things. First, a few words on Swedish engagement with civil society, and then a couple of words on the UN 75 declaration and the linkage to civil society. A strong and vibrant civil society is, of course, key component in any sustainable democracy. And unfortunately, we see a decline in the global democracy for several years, long before the COVID-19 pandemic. Democratic principles are being undermined, human rights increasingly violated, the rule of law becoming weakening, and we see a shrinking space for civil society. A trend that has affected all regions of the world, and a trend that we see as very worrisome. And this is why my government, the Swedish government, in 2019 introduced a new foreign policy initiative, the Drive for Democracy. So we are stepping up our efforts to support and promote democracy, human rights, and the rule of law all over the world. And we do that together and in partnership with a number of countries. And democracy and gender, of course, go hand in hand. So the Drive for Democracy is very much going in partnership with our the Swedish feminist foreign policy, and that is to increase the participation of women and girls all over the world. And civil society organizations, including women's rights organizations, are one of our most important partners in these endeavors. And there are examples, as we know, where the pandemic has been used as a pretext to silence opposition and civil society. And this is very serious, and we need to join hands in working against that. But our mission is to increase core support to civil society actors, including to youth organizations, movements, and networks. And then just a few words on the UN 75 declaration that I had the honor to facilitate together with my colleague from Qatar. And just say that I'm very happy that despite the difficulties sometimes during the negotiations, that the declaration came out as a very strong manifest for multilateralism, and that the commitments reinforces and bring together our common agenda. And of course, that common agenda is very much an agenda for the future, and the entire civil society and youth part of the agenda is very important. And my colleague Alia and I spent a lot of time with civil society and with youth organizations during the process, and we both listened and was very inspired by recommendations that we received from civil society. And just to underline that the commitment on partnership in the declaration is of course key for the future work of the United Nations. The UN needs to do work in partnership, not only with civil society, but also other actors, in order to be able to deal with the challenges that we are seeing. But the role of civil society there is key. And of course, that is key when we are now not only sort of implementing the UN 75 declaration, but through that also building back better. We build back greener, and we build back to a more equal world. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Ambassador Nystrom. Really great to hear your effort on trying to address this decline in global democracy. I think it's definitely something on all of our minds. And especially, I think the role of civil society in that is really important, not just at the global international level, but in our countries as well. And Jan Ellison reminded us this morning about the importance of addressing and getting rid of the silos between national and international. And I think I'd love for this panel, as we think about the path ahead, to really address how we get to making those connections, and especially empowering civil society to address the domestic challenges we're having in our own countries on democracy, because clearly we're not going to be able to renew or restore multilateralism if our own countries are drawing inward. So let me move on to our next speaker, Mahir Nasser, my old friend. Mahir, go ahead.
Thank you, Mintu, and great to see you again, and also to speak after 3 distinguished ambassadors and friends, Anna Karen, Adela, and Ivan. I'm very honored and privileged to have been given this opportunity. As you all know, in the Department of Global Communications, we manage the part of the relationship with civil society, and we have the civil society unit. We also have NGLS within the department, and organize events, activities to engage with civil society and give them a place at the table, at least our table, as much as possible. And everybody on this conference knows that there are almost 2 tiers of NGOs working within the United Nations, those accredited with ECOSOC, who have access to intergovernmental processes, and those who are associated with the department and that work with us in terms of amplifying and connecting with the outside world. COVID-19 has actually further reduced the space of interaction with civil society, the physical space. I'm speaking to you from home. Most of you are speaking from home, some from their offices, but we have leveraged technology to the extent possible to expand and go beyond the conference room 3, conference room 2, or the General Assembly, where we often had events and activities, to utilize the platforms that alternate and give us the opportunity to engage. We have held more than a dozen virtual events since the COVID struck, and that has given us the opportunity to engage with NGOs and partners in parts of the world that we have not been able to connect with on a regular basis. So even after COVID, what we plan to do is to go back and engage and continue to use these platforms to continue that relationship with the young people, NGOs around the world. Anna Karen spoke about Security Council Resolution 2250, and I think that was a milestone engaging with young people, and that's something that we have also started to do with the NGOs that we work with. Part of the initiatives that we launched over 10 years ago and that we're very proud of is to encourage NGOs to designate young people, youth delegates, and they have become some of the most active in the engagement we have virtually, but also in person. What we have done is try to position the civil society conferences, the NGO conferences that we organize, to lead into intergovernmental processes, so that gives an opportunity outside of the actual UN conferences that civil society meets on its own. We bring experts from the UN. In the last conference, we had the President of the General Assembly herself present in Salt Lake City. And then the declaration that civil society adopts is shared with member states, is shared within the UN. It's like facilitating that voice. But what I wanted to say is that as we talk about civil society space and engagement with member states, and those of you who have seen me speak at our events know I have said this before, engaging with member states and intergovernmental processes should not start at the United Nations with missions in New York City or in Geneva for that matter. I think engagement needs to start with governments also in capitals in parallel with legislative bodies in your own governments. Because if you look at the big private sector companies, most of them have offices and lobby groups in those capitals, and they try to influence regulation and legislation, because that is eventually what we need to do to be able to address the climate crisis. That we need to ensure that when we have global the movement and mobilization to achieve the SDGs, that it incorporates regulation to facilitate the work of the private sector. Many in the private sector are coming to the UN and saying, how can we also be part of this process? Civil society creates that pressure on the private sector as well as it needs to on regulators. So that space needs to start not just at the UN in New York with missions, but way beyond that. And I think that is something that a message that is very, very, very important that for them to go and argue for more space within the United Nations. And I think that the processes, and it was really great to see in the declaration of UN 75 and much credit goes to Anna Karen and Alia, who facilitated that process in ensuring that there is more space and reference and focus on civil society. The vaccines are coming up, and I think in our work on dispelling disinformation and misinformation around COVID, we have relied also on our partnership with civil society because we see them as a partner in amplifying the core messaging and core activities of the organization. And the big battle that we are all facing now is a battle of misinformation around COVID-19. And the next battle is about vaccines. We see vaccine confidence and working to improve vaccine confidence as key, but not only vaccine confidence in a vaccine, but also the need to ensure that this vaccine that will be available is available to all. As the Secretary General has said, it needs to become the people's vaccine. I think I have exceeded my 5 minutes, so I know that there's another chance to answer questions, so I'll stop here and being as limit is over. So Mentu, back to you.
Great, thanks so much, Maher. And again, Maher was with the UN Department of Global Communications. Next, we have Ms. Warda, who is co-chair of the Asia Pacific Regional CSO Engagement Mechanism. Rina, go ahead.
Thank you so much for this opportunity, and also good evening, everyone. I'm from the Asia Pacific Forum on Women, Law and Development, and we are also the co-chair of the Asia Pacific Regional CSO Engagement Mechanism, which is a platform of more than 800 CSO, consists of grassroots organization, people's movement, working and engaging with the UN system across the region and also globally. So I am asked to actually speak, right, about the potential and opportunities for civil society engagement in the UN. And yes, we can speak a lot on our experience about that. But before that, let me probably pose some questions on the inclusion and engagement, particularly engagement of grassroots communities, including women in the Global South, whom voices needed to be heard the most in the whole of the UN, and also whom we don't want to leave behind. So the question will be this, right? One is that how do we achieve inclusion and engagement, or at the very least participation, when civic and democratic spaces are under attack, with activists, women human rights defenders, indigenous peoples, trade union and workers being intimidated, arrested, prosecuted, and killed when they are trying to defend and claim their human rights? And then also, how do we ensure inclusion without tackling deliberate policies, practices, decisions designed to enrich and empower a few at the expense of the others? And then so the last one is actually, how do we strive inclusion and engagement while in reality, the global economic capitalism, corporate power, and political systems that dominating the world right now depend fully on exclusion and exploitation? So our assessment in our engagement with the UN process, and also we engage a lot on the SDG process, has found there is a glaring absence of the work to assess the systemic barriers that driving women and peoples behind. Like it also consists of, economic system that drive inequality further through larger and more far-reaching trade and investment treaties, for instance. And then also we see many governments contribute to the increasing military spending and also conflicts and engaging in the proxy wars by enabling greater land and also resource grabbing, by ignoring and even fueling patriarchal, fundamentalist, and extremist practices, by reducing the space for civil society to prosper, and also committing or enabling attacks on them. The other issue that I also want to put forward is actually the issue of privatization of the UN and how the private finance is invited with power in the implementation of the global development policies and commitment is really a deep concern of the civil society and the people's movement. Increasingly, we see that a space outside of the UN is actually created and led by powerful governments with private sector leadership, further marginalize the relevance of the UN and multilateralism, as well as further leave people behind. And then we can see that, right? So one of the opportunities that I want to highlight is in relation with regionalism, and then how we actually able to increase the role of the UN in the regions. Having engaged with the regional process for the 4 years, it is clear for us, we are the Asia and the Pacific Civil Society that engage in the APRSEM, that a regional process has much to offer in many ways. One, in terms of the civil society engagement, it creates proximity and accessibility for local and grassroots communities to engage with regional discussion and work closely with their governments at the national level and so on, hence strengthening mutual accountability. The second is also how the regional processes actually enable regional priority issues and systemic barriers to achieve sustainable development and human rights to be discussed. We have a very good practice from Latin America and the Caribbean region, like the binding Escazú agreement to protect the access to information, public participation, and also access to environmental justice that has been set up, and also the Montevideo strategies that develop concrete action points for women human rights and gender equality. So all of this is coming with the accountability framework. Yes, I will. I'm just going to wrap up. I'm just wanted to say that this we on the role of the civil society. I think that it is very important to actually really have that kind of partnership from the UN with the civil society that put people and women at the center. Thank you so much.
Great, thanks so much. I didn't mean to interrupt, but I do think these are such rich ideas, and I'd love to get our participants' reactions to that. Also, if you could just later when we come back to you, speak a little bit to, I like the regional approach. Obviously, the UN needs to do that, but I do think there's something about this national level because there is a lot of I think anxiety around the world that maybe the world is getting too global too fast and that we're not paying attention to what's happening in our own backyards. And that's part of the reason why we are seeing a sort of rise of nationalist populism. And so we'd just love to have you address that when we come back to you later. Next, we have Dr. Mabel Bianco, who is founder of the Foundation for Studies and Research on Women from Argentina. Go ahead, please.
Hello, good morning. And I'm very happy to be with you. And of course, coming from Latin America, where the feminist movement is so strong, as you know, and we are pushing not only regionally and nationally, but also globally, I'm really very happy to, first of all, say that we consider we need to start the post-COVID now. We couldn't wait. We need to start to do the changes that they are necessary, because COVID made us really see still the discriminations, the difference, the inequalities, and specifically for women and young people. So we couldn't say, let's wait till the end, because when we are going to be in the end, we are going to be loose. And I'm afraid we lose this year. We could start thinking of that. We know what happened, and we know how to solve it. So I also want to say that we are very preoccupied in my region, that still we believe in the, of course, in the UN Charter as well, we the people. And the Argentina was one of the countries in the region that was in 1945 mobilizing on that. But we need to recover this. We lose that and make it more difficult. So when we say to revitalize, we need to say that we need to change. And the change is, how is the relation among the stakeholders. And of course, democracy was also affected more, if it's before, but more by COVID, because make it more difficult that our voices, that people's voice could be listened at country level and also at regional and global level. So to strengthen democracy, we need to strengthen the voices of civil society and of course of women and young people, because why? We are not yet, it's not true that we are having all, not one left behind. We are leaving a lot behind. Sorry to say, we are still needed to be considering that old people, and specifically most of women, that they are the indigenous, that they are the Afro-descendants, that they are the migrants, that they are those living with HIV and many others that they are left behind. And we need to recover that. And we couldn't accept that differences and of course that inequalities that they are happening. So we need to discuss, of course, how is our development, how is the systemic barriers that we have, because it's very easy to say, move and have all live, no one leave behind. But how are we going to do that? This is not so easy. And this is what we need to have, of course, taking care. And this is what we are claiming. Our movement, the feminist movement in Latin America and the Caribbean, we are working all together with UN Women and ECLAC to be able to find those issues. And as said Rina before, we need to also improve the regional participation, because at regional level, we are more close, we have similar problems, and we need to share and find the solutions. And of course, the solution is the changes we need to do. We need to do those changes. If not, nothing will happen. And I'm very sorry to say that it's very nice to say we want to emphasize human rights. But in our regions, as you know, women defenders are persecuted, are killed. And I don't need to say you about Berta. You all know her, but we have a lot of Bertas and nothing happens. So this is how we need to fight. And we need to understand that defenders of women's rights or women's rights need to be protected. If not, we are doing hypocrisy, because we are saying we are following the human rights and we are persecuting those that are defending those. So I must say that we need to have a lot of work, and I'm very happy many of our state representatives in this say that, but please, we need to do this in a way that is a reality. It's the only thing, and this is how we are going to honor the day tomorrow, that is the Human Rights Day. It's the Women's Rights Day, and for all those that are left behind in all the regions and in all the world. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Mabel. That's so great. And, you know, I think Ambassador Nystrom mentioned earlier that, you know, when we're talking about reversing the decline of democracy, that really the role of women and feminism is part and parcel of that. So thank you for your comments. So now we're going to move into our rapid fire rotating civil society respondent session. I'm going to skip to Ayushi Kundu, who is with the Soroptimist he's a, let's see, Soroptimist International Youth Leader. Go ahead, Ayushi.
Good evening, everyone.
Oh, great.
Good evening, everyone. I'm currently President's Appeal Coordinator and a young member at Soroptimist International, and it is a great honor to be a rotating participant at today's Global Town Hall meeting. Now, I know a lot of several of today's experts have touched upon this area. So my question is, in what tangible ways can the UN insulate civil society organizations from the political inertia of member states who sometimes have the tendency to create an atmosphere of fear and domination and grant corporate immunity, thereby curtailing the freedoms of speech and association of civil societies, especially moving forward in this decade of action when CSOs will play a key role in realizing the sustainable development goals and to also help in realizing the commitments made in the Omnibus Declaration and other declarations in recent times. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Ayushi, and apologies for getting your gender incorrect. So I think that's a great question, and I'd love to also hear from our next speakers about what they think needs to happen to empower and support member states at the UN so that they can pay attention to this. I think some of them feel a tension that their own societies are not don't want them to engage internationally. And I think that's a balance that, you know, even if civil society asks them to do that at the global level, it's not going to happen unless they get that momentum from the national level too. Okay, great. So we are going to go next to Stephen Aiello, who is the founder and director of Debate for Peace in Israel. Go ahead, Stephen.
Thank you. Yes, I work with Model UN and the peace movement in the Israeli-Palestinian context. And I'm inspired on a daily basis by the thousands of creative solutions that youth come up with in Model UN. And so firstly, it's something that I would love to see diplomats in the UN looking at Model UN conferences themselves, just because there's such a range of solutions to problems and passion for problem solving. And in the peace building context, I see amazing ideas on the very local level that can be scaled, but they're not getting the access to the top level decision makers. And so the question that I would leave for the panel is, those are my ideas, but where are the areas where you want help? Where are the areas where you think from the UN perspective, civil society can help you? Where can we fill in the gaps? So,
That's such a great question. Thank you, Stephen. How can civil society be helpful? That's great. Thank you. Next, we're going to move on to Michael David Turungwa, who is with the Grassroots CSO Climate Reality. He's a leader in Nigeria. Go ahead, David. David, are you there? Okay. I will wait another 2 seconds. And then we will move on to Rory Monsigne, who is a CSO youth leader. Please go ahead, Rory.
Hi, my name is Rory Monsigne, and I'm the Director of Civic Engagement and Strategic Diplomacy at the International Association for Political Science Students. IAPS is a democratic student government that represents students all over the world through our 6 regional divisions. And in that regard, I'd love to ask the panelists how we can connect students to civil society work and incorporate human rights into formal educational structures to build a next generation of global citizens. Thank you.
Thanks for that concise question. And Rory, where are you calling in from?
I'm calling in from New York.
Okay, so are you American?
Yes.
Okay, great. Always helpful to know the background. All right, so next we have Erastus Mungare, who is with Startup Africa. Erastus, are you in there? No? Okay.
Oh, yes.
Go ahead. Oh, there you are. Go ahead, please.
Hello, everybody. Erastus Mungare, Executive Director from Startup Africa. Delighted to be in this session, especially at a time when the world has shown us about the challenges that young people are facing from learning to employment. At Startup Africa, we believe that the future of our young people is going to be focused on how we come together, just like the ambassador said in his opening remarks. How do we come together? How do we harness the resources, the knowledge, the skills that we have to be able to achieve that? We have a goal of impacting 1 million youth through entrepreneurship, innovation, and skills development. And from hearing from all the panelists earlier, from the time we started today, we hear the focus is that, and the UN Sustainable Development Goals are tightly tied into that. This Friday, We are connecting a group of youth from a school in New Jersey and a school in Northern Kenya who are going to be coming up with a solution on addressing the locust problem, which is causing havoc in the farming sector in that part of Northern Kenya. When we're able to bring people together to be able to use their skills, their resources, their knowledge, their partnerships, then we are going to be able to make the world a better place. We welcome you to learn about what Startup Africa is doing and how we can work with the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals at startupafrica.org. And congratulations to the hosts.
Great, thank you so much. Next, we are moving to Judy Dixon. Go ahead, Judy, you have 1 minute.
I didn't know I was on the list. I was kind of wondering where faith-based organizations fit into the plans to bring forward the development goals in the near future. It seems to me that there is a role for faith-based organizations universally, and sometimes that role is not clear.
Okay, great. Thank you. We're calling on you because we saw that your hand was up. Thanks for that.
Oh.
And I have Aaron Etra. Go ahead, Aaron.
Yes, thanks, Mintu. My question to our wonderful ambassadors, as we focused on international, universal challenges of climate change and the like, I wonder, as representing 3 different regions, how they feel civil society can assist in dealing with the regional problems, which we know are very endemic at the moment, whether it's the Middle East, whether it's Central Europe, or whether it's elsewhere in the world. So is there a role, in their view, for civil society to assist the United Nations in dealing with regional problems as well as universal problems?
Great, thank you. I think we've got a wealth of questions. So I'm going to go back to our expert panelists, unless there's anyone else who's ready to jump in, though we are getting close to time. All right, so let's go back to our panelists. Unless Aaron Holtz is back on. Actually, hold on, panelists, just 1 second. Let me see if Aaron Holtz from Global Citizen is on. Okay, great. So we will go to our panelists to answer some of these questions. And panelists, I'd really love to, I think we've gotten a combination of questions of what can the UN do to help empower them, but also questions about what civil society can do to help support you all. And I'd love to just get into that, this issue of, you know, at least, you know, in this country, in my head has been fully immersed in the domestic politics of the United States recently over the last year or so since I left the UN Foundation. You know, and as we think about, you know, the ways to sort of ask UN leaders to be more supportive of civil society, a lot of times our ambassadors, our negotiators at the UN officials are somewhat constrained by what their own citizens have voted for and are wanting. And obviously this is more relevant to more democratic societies. And so, you know, I think, you know, I've been reflecting on how civil society in countries can help to empower their own citizens to better understand the role of global cooperation, how important it is for their own governments to engage with other countries, to care about what happens in other parts of the world. And the more that they're able to vote for and support leaders who support global cooperation, the more likely then at the global level, civil society will be empowered. And so I think sort of this tension and this question of what can UN leaders do? And then on the flip side, what can civil society do to help support? So let me go to our panelists. And I'm going to ask our ambassadors first to respond. Any of our ambassadors, if you want to just jump in and answer some of the questions that have been raised.
Hello, this is Adlara. Can I
go ahead? Yes.
Yes.
Please go ahead, Ambassador Raz. Great.
Okay, thank you. I couldn't start the video, so I just moved on to the audio part. Oh, now I can do it. Thank you.
Okay.
I think, let me thank the colleagues and friends for the excellent presentation, and as well as the very important questions that all the audience asked. And I think in the way you summed it up, I'm just going to start how you summed it up. In a sense, how can the civil society help the UN leaders in order for the challenges we have? And I think I might defend the UN leaders in a way, and in this way, I'm going to explain what I mean. By UN leaders, I mean colleagues who work at the United Nations. Because for clarity, I have to say it's a lot of member states, us, that we gave the roadmap and the roadmap to UN colleagues on what to do. And most of us, I think, a lot of time it's the member states that arrives with some of the constraints or some of the limitations that's so much driven by national politics. So here comes the role of the civil society, and Madam Moderator, you made a reference to that as well. How civil society can help. I think it comes back the engagement, the advocacy, and standing on the right principles that at this day and currently globally, there is a little bit of absence. And I think there is a not so much pleasant transition or move towards conservative views, if I may say, or nationalist thinking. I believe the strength of United Nations comes from the mandate that the member states are giving. And our mandates are a lot driven by our governments, and our governments' mandates are driven by the public. And the public civil society is part of it. So I think greater engagement from them, greater advocacy, strong voice, and that also relates to one of the questions, how civil society can help in terms of the role of the regional problems that some regions may have. And if I speak on behalf of South and Central Asia and where Afghanistan is, and of course we do have challenges, and I think where I see civil society can help would be to bridge our very minor differences that exist in the region. And I think to bridge the similarities we have and help the governments and us to look into the bigger picture and identify those similarities and advocate for greater prosperity and stability in the region and beyond. So I think that would be my response. And there is a huge power that civil society has. Don't underestimate what you're able to do. If it is students, I heard one of the audience who was representing a student association and union here in New York. I think if it's the younger generation, if it's students, advocates, I think you really drive the agenda. So stand on and move and drive that agenda and pressure us to do the right things. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Raz. Those are such great comments. And thank you also for your honesty and openness with addressing some of the constraints that you have there. That's really helpful, I think, for folks to understand. You know, national politics, it's pretty clear in my mind that when the second we rest, and the second that civil society thinks that, you know, the system will work, our laws, you know, the ways that, you know, that it'll all work. The second that we rest is actually when we start to lose our way. And, you know, with democracy and with just engagement, you have to constantly have your foot on the pedal and constantly be paying attention, holding folks to account, rallying, connecting with our other citizens to, you know, for common cause to work. So thank you so much for that. Let me see if there's others, any other ambassador, any of our other panelists who'd like to come in and answer some of these great questions that have been raised.
I'd be happy to do so.
Oh, great. Ambassador Shimonovich, go ahead, please.
Thank you. I would like to thank for excellent questions, but I have to leave something for other colleagues, so I'll pick just two of them. And I would like to make a reference on how to include human rights in education, which Rory raised. It's crucial that we have more human rights in programs and in textbooks. On international level, within the United Nations system, it's UNESCO and OHCHR who are trying to push for that. And absolutely, civil society can support their attempts. However, it's even more powerful to try to influence these processes nationally. Now, of course, that programs and textbooks are important. It's also that teachers are important. Even if you do not have explicit references in textbooks, or you do not have formally human rights included in programs, nobody can prevent teachers to mainstream human rights in their lectures. So it's very important for civil society to engage with associations of teachers on different levels. Also, the question have been asked how to address some issues specifically related to COVID-19 resolutions, what civil society can do. We are facing right now the immorality of a situation where some wealthy member states are accumulating huge amounts of vaccines, more than they need, when compared to member states that at the moment seems at risk, that even the most neediest, the ones who are most at risk, would be deprived of vaccines. And I think that civil society in respective countries which have good access to vaccines should be doing something about that to ensure that nobody is left behind. This is on a short run, but on a long run, I think that problems with politicians is their short-term thinking and their interest in public opinion polls just ahead of next elections. And I think that by highlighting on behalf of academic community, civil society, that civil society is interested in long-term perspective. A lot can be done in pushing the ideas such as One Health approach that is a long-term approach that combines the health of planet Earth, the health of animals, and health of peoples. I will just give a brief illustration. The cutting of woods makes bats come near to farms, infect farm animals, and then we eat them. And that's how some zoonotic diseases have come, and that's the danger that they will continue to come. Only by doing that comprehensive approach, we can protect ourselves better from next pandemics. And of course, civil society can have an important role in drawing attention to these long-term preventive measures. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Shimonovich. Let me bring in Anna Karin and Estrom. Ambassador Estrom, would you like to? Great. Go ahead, please.
Yes, thank you. I tried to raise my hand, but I was not very successful. But thank you. Thank you very much. And thanks for great questions. I totally agree with what Adela and Ivan have already said. And I think one thing that Adela said, I wanted really to very much agree with, and that is the importance of the values and principles that the civil society continue to push for our principles and values. And then I wanted to say to the person that brought up the model UN, I think this is great. And I have engaged quite a lot with different groups of model UN here in New York, in Sweden, and on other postings. And I really agree that this is a fantastic way of getting young people engaged in the multilateral affairs. And I'm sure that there are very good solutions that are also presented at this model UN. But I wanted to talk about the role of civil society when it comes to the national, regional, global level, because I think that it is important that civil society are engaged on all these different levels, that they are pushing governments on the national level, that they are working on the regional level. And especially, I mean, I come from a region where there's a very strong region organization, the EU, and of course the EU works very closely with civil society. So does my own government. I'm very used, I come from a country where it's very natural, and civil society is an integrated part of our policies. But I would really encourage and underline the important role that civil society plays on all these different levels. And I think also when it comes to issues, I think you are the one to define the issues. But I would say that I think it was very interesting to follow the UN 75 conversations that the Secretary General and his team had with young people around the world. And I think that there are some trends that we are seeing on which issues are on the agenda of young people and of civil society. I mean, if I would point at one issue, I mean, for the future, it would be climate change. But of course, issues like the human rights, the health issue, social protection, and I spoke about gender equality and democracy. These are also key issues. And maybe one of the overarching issues is, of course, the inequalities that we are seeing in the world right now, and how that has been enhanced and broadened during the pandemic. And this is not only between nations, this is also, as we know, within nations. So I think that is an issue that we all need to push. And I would end in agreeing with what Adela said. I mean, I think it's important that we as member states work together with civil society, but your role is also to push us. It is to push us to act, and I think that's probably the most important role for civil society. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ambassador.
May I? It's Mabel.
Yes, please go ahead. Yep.
Thank you so much. Well, I'm very happy and want to say that we have a problem in our region that I think there are in other regions, that we say we need to improve NGOs and civil society participation at national, regional, and global. But one of the problems we are finding now is that there are some countries that are restrained and also not allow civil society participation because, well, they say they are doing some political activities or are making travels to the government. So now we are finding that there are many NGOs, strong NGOs in many countries, that they are not allowed to participate at country level. And this is a great problem because we need to have the support of regional and global level to understand and make the governments understand that civil society must be allowed only if they are having any real and very well based denounce that they are doing some political activity or irresponsible, but not as they are doing now, that is supposed, as they are receiving money from outside or something like that, they are closed and they couldn't participate. This is something that is a new thing in the last years in our region, and is very dangerous. And that's why we are requesting that at regionally and at global level is some help announcing or making statements ensuring that this couldn't pass anymore, because if not, it's not possible to do at national level because also we are put in jail or persecuted, not yet killed, but yes, persecuted. And many, in some countries, many NGOs directors must leave the country due to persecution.
Thank you so much, Mabel. Let
Yes.
me see if Rena.
Yes, I
Go ahead.
actually want to say something, and then this is really, really in line with what Mabel said. So Mabel said that, you know, like that's what happened also in the Latin American, Caribbean, also in Asian and Pacific country. The reason why we actually really want to actually build that regional platform is also because of that reason, because there's a lot of shrinking civic spaces in the national level where they cannot even like engage in the with the government in the national level. So the way that they engage with this process is through region, and then from that region they're able to maintain some level of conversation or relationship with the government, that they can actually continue that conversation in the national level. So that also one value added. I think that having that bridge between the national and the global level process, and then to strengthen the regional process. I actually just want to end one thing about what UN can do, you know, like this is all like the platform that we initiated, and then this is not only in Asia Pacific, but also now we have from the ECE region, we also from ECA, and then also in Latin America and Caribbean. This is won't be happening if there's no commitment, I think, coming from the UN to actually put peoples at the center to deliver the promise of the participatory democracy. And then to do that and to support the most important ingredient of human rights and sustainable development, which is a local, powerful, feminist, and people's movement advancing human rights. And then that is the most important thing that I want to, I just going to stop there. Because
actually, I want to just follow up both to Mabel and to Rena, because, you know, this point about closing civil society space in certain countries where, you know, already there's a kind, you know, it's already difficult for civil society to work in. So is there an opportunity then for civil society in countries that are more open, like the United States, like parts of, you know, other countries in the world, to partner then and then help to learn from civil society activists in countries where there is shrinking civil society space, to learn about what they need, and then to champion those needs from the outside. You know, so I think there is, I would imagine there's some room to sort of partner, both to understand what's happening and what's needed, and then to also help to empower from the outside, where maybe then the governments have less authority to, you know, to make it difficult for civil society groups from the outside. Just want to see if both of you have a response to that.
Yes, definitely, because that's also the core thing that I think that the platform, like what we have now, is actually aiming for, is about how to foster solidarity, you know, and then it's very, very important. I think that it's very important to actually have a pressure or support coming from a different country to actually able to help the discussion, to open up the space for the civil society in the specific country. And then we've been doing that. I think that in the regional level, in the global level, the regional and global solidarity is the most important thing. And then also it needs to be across movements and across constituency. So I'm going to,
Yeah, so I want Mabel to come in, but can I just ask each of you for one specific thing that civil society groups outside, when you talk about solidarity, what can they do? Just one specific thing.
Well, for instance, like,
I don't mean big picture, but something very
just like very tactical, like petition, campaign together, you know, like solidarity actions. This is something that they can do. Even like they can actually do something like have a conversation and then also discuss with the UN Special Rapporteur and mandate holders about the issue. This is something that we do as a regional solidarity actions.
Great. Okay, Mabel, and then we're going to move on to Nasser.
Yes, thank you so much. Well, I want to add to those that was Rina said, that is important that at regional and at global level, there are some, the states make some statements in which they recognize and they push, because those activities you are mentioned are good, but they are not sufficient. And this is what we need to strengthen. And also, as Rina said, we denounce, we are requesting, and also we are supporting some of those women to go to regional or global meetings to express what they suffer and why they are persecuted. So we put, they can say to everybody, you know, but the problem still remains that they couldn't have them inside. And also they lost the money. They take off the money and they couldn't mobilize. And this is a very terrible point. So we need to have both. Sorry.
Okay, no, that's great. And I didn't mean to go down that too much, but this is just so important because we talk in these big picture, you know, sweeping ways. And I think the more concrete and specific we can get, the better. So I'm going to give the last word to Maher Nasser. If you can be very quick in your wrap up. I know there are a lot of good questions there for you. Maher?
Oh, thank you, Mintu. And I think many of the issues that I would have spoken about have already been covered by Mabel and Tete and the ambassadors. But I think just going back to the core of it, which is human rights. And I think the Human Rights Universal Periodic Review also offers the opportunity for civil society to say something about the record of the countries and the governments that are stifling the work of civil society. And in some cases, we know that civil society, local civil society, is put in prison simply for meeting with external entities or people representing other NGOs because they're seen as taking orders or money from outside. So there's a sensitive element to that is in play. Just to go back to a couple of things that were mentioned, one of the things, there was a question about faith-based, and I think faith-based organizations play a key role in many of the things that happen in societies, because still faith plays an important role, and institutions of faith are sometimes of more influence, and all faiths, most if not all, are based on the principle of solidarity. And what we need now in the aftermath of COVID, with the social economic impact, the inequality that has been exposed, is more solidarity, particularly as we address the issue of vaccines and moving forward on that. So there's an engagement that is necessary. If you're not a faith-based organization, do engage with faith-based organizations and bring them on board, especially on issues of dealing with the social economic impact inequality, but also on the issue of climate action and climate change. These are two core challenges that we are faced with. And just to go on the last point on Model United Nations, I mean, we do recognize the importance of Model United Nations at the department. We actually published this last September, which is the first United Nations actual guide to how to properly simulate the United Nations, because most Model United Nations, people do not realize this, do not simulate the United Nations. They simulate a version that is based on a completely different rules of procedure, completely different work around. This brings it back to the reality, that also brings into the reality and helps students understand the principles of the equal sovereignty of member states, but also that most resolutions today are adopted on the basis of consensus, and negotiating for consensus is completely different than just negotiating for winning one goal beyond the post. So I'll stop here.
Actually, if that's available online, if you could just drop that into the chat, the link to that document, if it's available online, that would be great.
It is available online, shop.un.org. I'll put the link. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you so much. All right, so I have gone way over time, but I just thought this was so important, and thank you so much to our brilliant ambassadors for leading us off with this really important conversation, and to everyone else, our panelists and our respondents. I'm going to hand the floor over to Daniel for the rest of this. Thank you so much.
Great, thank you. I'm so sorry for that slight delay. I thought we were going to switch over to Jocelyn, but thank you so much for this wonderful event thus far. It has been really quite excellent, and almost too much content to wrap our heads around. But what I'm going to do is cheat a little bit, because I think it's more important to hear from others rather than myself. So I'm actually first going to see if Aaron, who wasn't around before and is around now, if he would like to offer a quick thought from Global Citizens' perspective, and then after he does so, we will move to the proper session that I plan to put forward. So Aaron Holtz, are you there?
I am. Thank you very much. Hi, Daniel, and good afternoon to everyone. And congratulations on a fantastic town hall. What a rich discussion over the last few hours. Sorry I had to bounce out, but I'm back, and I wanted to make just a short contribution on behalf of Global Citizen, which is an international advocacy organization that connects individuals to issues they care about around the world, and also leverages commitments to policy and financial commitments to solve some of the world's biggest challenges, especially the elimination of extreme poverty. I just wanted to share one reflection. We recently supported a survey by localities and the Ban Ki-moon Center on views around the UN. And I'm just going to share the link in the chat in case you're interested. But a couple of takeaways from this survey, which spoke to 27,000 people across 25 countries. The biggest takeaway was that the United Nations had the highest approval of any organization in terms of positive views. 47% of respondents had a favorable view of the UN compared to the European Union, the United States, government, or parliaments in general. The second takeaway, which I think is interesting, is that these high levels of support for the UN correlated with high levels of support for their own government around the world. So I know as an American citizen, sometimes supporting the UN is seen as a false choice between supporting your own government or supporting, multilateral diplomacy. And I think the survey shows that that's not the case, that there are people around the world who want to support their own governments and also understand the value of multilateralism. So as we think forward in terms of how we advocate in 2021, on behalf of Global Citizen, want to see 2021 as an opportunity to help the world fall back in love with the UN and fall back in love with multilateralism. If COVID has taught us nothing else, is that we have to join together in order to solve some of these problems. So as an organization, that's what we'll be focusing on. I'm interested in your thoughts as well as how we can do that together. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Aaron. Glad you were able to share that link and results from that survey. I am going to do my best to keep this a dynamic and entertaining session. So first, we're going to start with a poll. There's going to be lots of polls and Mentimeter and all of this. So I'm going to launch the first poll while I try to set up my screen sharing. So here it goes. Hopefully you all can see it. It's a very sophisticated poll. Good. I see some people are filling this out. I see even a couple of people are curious about the box that popped up on their screen. So that was just to make sure you're paying attention. You see we have 90% of you are wondering how you could possibly look away. And the other 8% of you are saying, what is this box that appeared on my screen? So that's our first poll, but we're going to get into a very quick presentation, and I promise to be short. It's UN 2020 Global Town Hall, Developing an Action Plan, and you'll see I put a very thoughtful subtitle there. So what is this session going to be? So we were going to review 4 key documents, but I'm going to quickly fast forward through that in light of time, and then we're going to talk about where we go from here. So again, I'm going to very quickly do another poll that I think is more relevant. It's not a joke, this one. And this one is about how you understand the primary role of civil society, or rather your primary role as a civil society organization. So we have hold government accountable, provide goods and services, develop partnerships, raise awareness, build consensus, or other forms of advocacy. And I know there's a bunch of options here, but it's helpful just to understand what is sort of the understanding that we all have of our role as civil society and our role in our independent organizations. So I'll give that a moment to run. And in the meantime, I'll just walk through what the purpose of this session is to outline a possible process to help develop a plan for engagement as civil society. So like I said, there'll be these polls and some Mentimeter. But after this brief overview, we will take more information from you all, and I have that word cloud to share. So I'll give you 10 more seconds on this one. Great. So what I'll do is I will share the results, and you see one of the reasons that I wanted to do this is because there are a number of different understandings that we could all have. Share results. So please don't click stop sharing. Okay, so what had happened, for those who did not see it, because it went away, all the co-hosts, if you could not click on the poll once it has gone out, that would be very helpful. But what we found in that first poll was that about 50% said raise awareness and share information, close to 50% said hold government accountable, but it wasn't an overwhelming majority of any one or the other thing, which means that we have a whole slew of purposes and a whole slew of approaches. And that's important to recognize as we are engaging in these different processes. There is no one size civil society, just as there's no one size fits all for governance strategies. So these are important things to recognize as we're, sort of saying what needs to be done and what we need to do. So let's get back to the session. I hope you can see that the screen is being shared. And what I wanted to do was go through quickly some of these resolutions because they are quite important. So we have this omnibus resolution on COVID-19. There's a link for it there. This slideshow will be shared. There's a trademark on the thoughtful subtitle. But yes, you can read through all of this. I tried to get some highlights. They did recognize the important role of civil society. They raised issues of human rights, health, water, sanitation, inequality, persons with disabilities. It was an omnibus resolution, and I think it behooves us to read this resolution as we are trying to get our governments to take action. It continues and encourages member states to engage all relevant stakeholders. Again, because of time, I'm going to be abbreviated, but I will share this document. Then there's a UN guidance note on protection and promotion of civic space. And if you haven't seen this, I strongly recommend that you take a look. This was meant to give the UN a kind of a pathway to ensure civil society participation, that there's participation, there's protection, and there's promotion. There's a full guidance note. The Secretary General launched this, I believe or he began the process of launching this in February of this year. And it's really a helpful document, again, as we're trying to understand the norms by which the UN and therefore its member states are meant to engage with civil society. Now I'm gonna quickly stop sharing this. Oh, I'm still sharing it. Okay, so there's another little Mentimeter that I wanted to do just so that we can again get some of your participation. So if you haven't done Mentimeter before, you go to www.menti.com and use the code 1620079. And this is one of the biggest challenges being faced by civil society today. So you can write down anything you wish. There's 3 boxes, but you can write down more or less. And again, this is just to understand what are some of those struggles that you think civil society is facing. And hopefully, as people fill out this Mentimeter, it will pop up. Yes, no, maybe. If one of the people that I'm in WhatsApp touch with can let me know that this is working. Yeah, there we go. Funding, shrinking civic space, COVID, keep them coming. Okay, the address, it should be on the screen shared, but it's menti.com at the top of the screen here. And the code is 1620079. And I can actually even put it, yes. Okay, so people are seeing it now. It should be updating. I'm seeing some chats. Great, menti.com, we see, being heard, good one. So keep these coming. It will update automatically and you can hopefully all watch it. Democracy, financing, funding, misinformation. So all of these challenges that we see here are meant to be addressed in some degree by this UN guidance note on protection and promotion of civic space. It seems that funding is really the #1 issue that we are facing. You can keep filling this out, but again, in the interest of time, I'm going to just move along. And we may even have to skip the next Mentimeter. So let me go back to presenting this screen. So here's the UN guidance note. Again, you can click on it. So I want to quickly talk about two declarations. The UN 75 political declaration, it had 12 commitments. We will leave no one behind, protect our planet. If you don't know this document, you should take a look at it. I put it on this clock because 12 is how many hours in half a day. But you see, this is sort of where we are. And I had hoped that this would be correct, that the current time in New York is prepared financing, which would be 12:45. But it turns out I'm 7 minutes off, so it's actually prepared youth, which is great. So that is this document. And again, please do take a look, because otherwise the numbers may fall apart and we cannot have that. So there's also this UN follow-on, this UN 75 follow-on process. And I think this is an opportunity for us as independent organizations, as networks, UN 2020, you know, whatever other networks you may be engaged in, for us to continue advancing this work. We'll work together with partners to strengthen coordination and global governance. This is directly from the member states' political declaration that Ambassador Enestrom was one of the co-facilitators of. And then paragraph 20 is requesting the Secretary General to report back before the end of the 75th session of the General Assembly. And we should be hearing in the middle of this month a little bit more about that process, or at least there will be an opportunity for member states to inform that process because it's beginning in earnest. But that wasn't the only declaration that came out around 2020. There was the People's Declaration and Plan for Action, which again, this document is hyperlinked at the top when you see this slideshow that will be again shared with you. And the goal is to uphold, we articulated in that document a number of our own commitments, rededicating ourselves to achieving international agreements, basic human rights, fundamental principles, strengthening partnerships, raising our voices. And again, I'm trying to go through quickly. I know it's too fast for most, but you will have access to this. So you have innovative solutions, ensure that our contributions are based on solid evidentiary basis, exploit new avenues. All of these are things that we have committed ourselves to. And just as we ask member states to fulfill their commitments, we also have a duty to do the same. And again, part of the reason we're going through these 4 documents is sort of to say, this is our map. This is, you know, what we have agreed is kind of our destination and the way we plan to get there. And if you look at the map just at the beginning of a trip and never look at it again, you're going to end up lost. So it's helpful from time to time to return to these kind of documents and make sure that we are staying true to the map, not just member states, but we also have to stay true to what we've committed. So let's go back to that Mentimeter, and we see these are some of the challenges faced by civil society. That will be kept. Now we can move on to the next question in the Mentimeter, I hope. Boop. Yes. How can we hold member states, the UN, and even ourselves to account for the promises made? So I know that it's 12:55, but I've received permission from Jocelyn to go a couple more minutes. So again, this is a scrolling thing, and it's how we hold ourselves and the UN accountable for promises made. And this is a harder issue, perhaps, which is maybe why there's less there. And perhaps we'll skip it just because maybe the question on its own is sufficient. Collect data and report on progress, recommit to ethics. So I would encourage you to keep adding things because we're going to save these documents for future use. Visibility, promises and review, participate in dialogues, be repetitive, Also, I think be repetitive. That's my joke. Okay, so we have manage information strategically. So you see, it's actually, there are a number of strategies that we can take on, and we'll continue to think about these. I mentioned that in that shared notes document, we would try to create a word cloud. So I have that here. I hope you can see. But here's the word cloud that came up from all the significant words we heard as of 12:30 or so. Human is right at the center, which I think is really what it should be. We have global, we have rights, women, change, participation, civil. I think that this is actually very, very nice. It shows me that the things that we're talking about are the things that are indeed most important to us. let's get back to this. Oh yes, we had some blue sky thinking, next steps. I want to quickly jump to next steps because here is one more poll, and this will be the last poll. And please, again, if you are a co-host, do not hit anything like end poll or show poll. It's what are the most effective ways for us to share success and learning? And the reason we're asking this is because as UN 2020 is proceeding, it's trying to have, it has a little identity crisis. It's the end of 2020. Who are we and what do we do and what should our mandate be? And so we're looking at how we share success and learning. There's written reports, infographics or proposals, public gatherings, social media, other forms of media. There should be other, you can always put that in that Google Doc as well. This way we can understand a little bit more how people, how those who are in this meeting wish to see us proceeding. And again, sorry for the rather abbreviated session, but that's what you get when you have great participants preceding you. So we're up to 47 participants in this. Great, I'm gonna end the poll in 10 seconds. Okay, cool. So I'm gonna share the results again. Don't touch the stop sharing button, please. So it looks like public gatherings like this one or public demonstrations or other gatherings coming together seems to be a really important dimension of this. More than half of you said that, actually more than 2/3. Half said written reports, infographics, and proposals are really important. Less is other forms of media like video and radio. And then social media is at the bottom, which is interesting because we see the emphasis on social media that many people have. But maybe this is where the real utility comes in. One last slide, and then Jocelyn, it's over to you. I know I'm running late. I hope you will forgive me. This last slide is just showing some of our next steps, which may be continuations of global town halls, perhaps every 3 months or 6 months to reflect on advances made. There hopefully will be another People's Forum. We had one in May of 2020. We may have one in May of 2021, again, coming together. Other activities, writing reports, sharing learning. We have some ideas listed in that Google Doc where there's a list of advocacy points. Please continue to add to that because that can serve in some degree, to some degree, as direction for us. And that's me saying thank you. I thought it looked like how I should look with less mouth because I speak too much. So Jocelyn, over to you, and sorry for taking up too much of your time.
No worries, thank you, Dan. It is going to be impossible to, I guess, summarize this 3-hour amazing, robust discussion and session, and especially at 5 o'clock in the morning in Australia. But I think that a strong theme that has come up, and I hope you're encouraged by it, is that CSOs are indispensable. And the ambassadors have strongly encouraged us to drive the agenda and to pressure and push governments to do the right thing on a national, regional, and international level. And I really like the idea of our role in exposing, opposing, and proposing. So let's work together to build back better, and hopefully we will see a revival in multilateralism. It is hard to believe that this Global Town Hall meeting is the last public event for UN 2020 for the year. We have had a great year, and I want to thank each and every one of our experts, moderators, facilitators, and civil society participants for your profound insights, inspiration, and wisdom that you have shared with us today. We are so grateful and thankful. In particular, I wish to thank the Global Town Hall UN 2020 coordinating team, Margot Lazaro from NGO Committee on Sustainable Development, Betty Levy from Seroptimus International, Daniel Perel from Baha'i International Community, Jeff Huffines from UN 2020 Together First, and Fergus Watt from UN 2020 World Federalist Movement Canada. And in addition, we want to thank the UN 2020 communications team, Monique, Rory and Yasmina, and the UN Department of Global Communications team for your support. I wish to thank all members and supporters of UN 2020 for joining us today and your steadfast support to our campaign. It is unfortunate that we called ourselves UN 2020 and that name is expiring on the 31st. So as we look forward into adopting a new name and a 3-year strategic plan beginning in 2021, we welcome your continued support and participation in future global town hall meetings and stock taking exercises that we will be organizing in the next year and years to come, hopefully with all of you, and galvanizing civil society engagement and in the consultations that will feed into the follow-up process for UN 75 political declaration. So follow us on social media at UN 2020 and sign up for our mailer at un2020.org to stay in contact. That will all be changed in the new year and you will find out the new name very excitingly. Can we ask all to put on your cameras for this last moment to take a quick photo and then we will say goodbye. So turn on your photos, give your big smiles. I'm not too sure who's taking the photo. Fix your hair. All right, everyone. You can have your videos on, big smiles.
More. Yeah. I'm gonna get a few more.
Keep smiling.
And one more. Perfect.
I guess this is our fishbowl photo moment. So thank you everyone for this amazing event. All the best. We'll see you. Happy New Year. Take care. It's been an honor.
Thanks, it was fun. Bye.